before we get started, I wanted to give a couple thank yous. The first is to Ari Tavakoli. Where are you, Ari? I think he's out running the show, but without him, none of this would have been possible. So thank you to Ari. And the second thank you is to the folks at Convene. We're big fans of Convene here at Common. We really love what they're doing and encourage you guys to check them out on convene.com. Without further ado, I wanted to introduce our founder and CEO, Brad Hargraves.
Thank you so much, Jason. We could not do this without you. You and your team has really done an amazing job here. I'm Brad Hargraves, the founder and CEO of Common, and I'm so excited to welcome all of you to our second ever Co-Living Capital Markets Conference. As Jason mentioned, we did our first one in New York. It blew past any of our expectations. We got over 600 RSVPs for about 300 seats, and there's a similar story this time here in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a really special market for us. It actually has the largest pipeline signed and under development for us of any city. It surpassed New York earlier this year as the largest common city. So thank you all for coming. I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about, now that this is our second one, why we do this and how we think about this. Because this is, we look at this as our developer conference, much in the same way a tech company would think about their developer conference. Dreamforce. How many people have tried to book a hotel room in San Francisco the week of Dreamforce? You end up, certainly my personal experience is you end up with a $600 a night room in the Tenderloin. I've been there. So we really think about this in the context of what tech companies have been doing for a long time. And Salesforce is a great one with, they run their Dreamforce conference, really there for anyone who is building on their platform, working with their technology, but they're not the only one. Oracle has Open World, Unity has Unite. These are conferences that are really there to bring together their ecosystem. People that are building on their technology, people that are working with it, to meet each other, to learn, to build community, maybe do deals, maybe get jobs, and they're institutions of these tech ecosystems. In real estate, there's really no analogy. Sure, there are conferences, but there's nothing that is on par with the Tech Developer Conference. And when you think about it, think for a second of a mainstream legacy property management company running a client conference. Can you imagine Lincoln and Pinnacle getting all their clients in a room together? It'd be crazy. But this is different. And it's different for two reasons that I wanted to talk about today. Because I think those two reasons will help us understand what's going on in co-living. There's clearly a moment happening here. And it will help us understand how to get the most out of today. So the first reason why it's different and why we're creating this developer ecosystem is that everyone here has a higher purpose. Everyone who's building co-living cares about affordability and is having a positive impact on the cities they're building in. I don't have to go through all the stats. A lot of you have probably heard them before. I certainly went through them in past talks and in New York. People are getting married later. Incomes have been surpassed by rent growth for more than 70 years. And that bifurcation has only increased over the last 10 years. More Americans are living with roommates than they ever have. 25 million Americans live with roommates, and that number has increased by 20% over the last 10 years. So I don't need to go through all the stats, but there is one stat that I read the other day that really struck me, and that's average household size. There are very, very few demographic and social trends that span urban and rural, rich countries and poor countries, across centuries and different ethnicities. But one of those stats is that household size has been decreasing. As people get wealthier, they have fewer kids, household size goes down. That's been universal, multi-century trend. In the US, household size has been decreasing every year since we started measuring it in 1790, until last year. Last year in the United States, household size increased for the first time in our nation's history. And the reason why that is, we're not having more kids. Fertility is actually at its lowest level in a very, very long time. Now, it's because young people, when they graduate from college, are moving back home with their parents or living with roommates. And that has become such a large societal trend that it has reversed one of the biggest, most universal macro trends of the last few centuries, which is decreasing household size. We are all in this room partly because the country and the world is going through this change, and we know that by building better product, by building the right kind of housing, we can have a positive impact and make sure that these changes happen in a way that still fosters a quality place to live for many, many millions of Americans. So there is a bigger purpose here than just making money. But we're also all in business. We're all here to make money. Which brings us to the second reason why this is different and why we can do this. The second reason is everyone in this room today is not okay with the status quo. We believe, by nature of being here, we could all decide not to come today, but we did. And we did because we believe there's a better way to do things. We're not okay with the status quo. Now that's just not just about co-living. That's certainly not just about Common, although I will talk about Common. But a lot of the people in here today, by nature of their interest in co-living, are also doing a lot of other really cool things. People using new technologies to lower construction costs and increase speed to market. People using data and AI to better evaluate, identify, and underwrite sites. There are a lot of people here doing really cool things that go beyond co-living and Common. And co-living is, as I said, a really important and a meaningful way to address the housing crisis, but there's a lot of other ways that the people in this room are innovating and doing really cool things. And I would encourage all of you to challenge yourselves to meet some of the other people in this room, because this is an invitation-only event. Remember, everyone who's here is here because we think you are thoughtful and you are doing really good and interesting work. So I'd really encourage everyone here to meet some of the other folks, some of the other 300 people in this room today. But I do want to talk a little bit about doing things better more broadly. It relates very heavily to where we're going at Common and where we see the multifamily ecosystem and co-living going. Q4 will be our first quarter in our company's history where we sign more buildings that are a mix of co-living and conventional units than we sign pure co-living buildings. Now, that's not any statement of negativity about co-living. In fact, we're going to be signing more co-living in Q4 than we've signed in any previous quarter. In Q3, and this goes to the tremendous work Jason and his team are doing, and all of you are doing, we signed more than 4,500 new beds that are now under development, which is actually more than we had to start the year of 2019. So we're seeing a pretty tremendous acceleration here. And one of the major drivers of that are some of the things that we're learning from co-living and applying to residential of all types. And this goes back to doing things better. None of us here are okay with the status quo, and there are a lot of ways to improve upon the operation and development of residential projects that just go beyond co-living. I'll give you an example. In pretty much every other industry where you're selling a high ticket value item to consumers, they run it on an inside sales model. What that means is when a lead comes in, that lead goes to a central call center, whether that's in-house or outsourced. For us, we're in-house. And the reason you do that is because there's a huge amount of data that shows that the faster you call leads, the higher the conversion rate. I'm not talking about 30% higher. I'm talking about 3 to 5 times higher if you can call that lead within 5 to 10 minutes of them applying to live in your building. But that's not the way most traditional property management works. In most traditional property management, that lead goes to an on-site leasing agent. That might be out on tours, they might be out on their lunch break, they might be out for the day. It might take them, they measure in hours how long it takes them to get back to a lead. So that's an example of how, by doing things better, by using data, by using technology, or just simply borrowing best practice from other industries and bringing it into residential, we can do things better. Last stat I'll leave you with, is I think it goes to the breadth of what we're talking about here. In 2019, 3% of all new construction property management agreements in the United States will be signed by Common. 3% of all units in the United States, which goes to the breadth of what we're doing. A lot of that is co-living, about half of that is co-living. But it goes to the breadth of what we're doing and the power of simply going in and challenging the status quo, which all of you here in this room are doing. This is not about us, this is about you. This is about how can we help each other, how can we help you, how can you help each other, addressing the affordability crisis here in the United States and bringing more housing to market. And by doing that, we will be able to make the real estate industry better. Speaking of making the real estate industry better, I'd like to introduce our keynote interview for today, Scott Miller. I first met Scott Miller about 3 years ago, and he immediately understood what we were doing. He got it, which about 3 years ago was kind of rare, because 3 years ago was still when people looked at us like we were crazy, like people live like this? Now, a lot of you in the room actually got onto it early as well, so I want to call that out. But Scott got it, and he got it because he's seen through his career in real estate the ability to do things better and the ability for industries to go through radical changes that create entire new asset classes. Scott was president and CEO of Hyatt Hotels in the 90s and early 2000s when it was going through its disaggregation, creating the hospitality asset class when the brands and operators were separating from the underlying assets. So he has a deep, deep bed of knowledge in traditional real estate and hospitality, but he also understands tech. He also understands technology. He's on a number of boards, including the board of Snap, and we're very fortunate to have him on our board of directors here at Common. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Scott Miller.
Thank you. I will.
Take a mic.
Perfect. Thanks. Oops. Is this on?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. All right. So Scott, thanks so much for joining us today. Really happy to have you here. So maybe let's kind of start from our first interactions, and then we'll go a little bit back. When we first approached you about joining the board of Common, did you know much about co-living, and what got you excited about the asset class?
Yeah, I think Brad's right that I got it quickly, but the simple fact is I probably didn't know what it was. I'd never heard the term co-living, maybe other than a mutual friend who had promoted the idea of my meeting Brad to him. But I clearly understood what was happening in the real estate industry, where we were where we were creating all kinds of variants around the way people will inhabit real estate. From Airbnb, which kind of came over to the far side of hospitality, where, typically was transient, short-term kind of use. Obviously, multifamily, which was addressing kind of midterm uses, and then obviously the whole categories of whole ownership. And so I was watching the industry, the residential side of the real estate industry begin to fractionalize and offer more bespoke, more tailored offerings into the marketplace that addressed the increasing need of people to live with a lower cost, a ease of entry and ease of exit. I think that part of it is oftentimes not as well understood as it should be. The fact that you can move from one common facility to another. No, I didn't know much about it. I learned a lot. I found it compelling, and I'm thrilled to be part of the team. I should say I'm really happy to be back here. I started my career in the real estate business, so this is a homecoming of sorts for me.
Awesome. Well, excited to have you here. So let's go a little bit back in time and think about the hospitality industry kind of back in the 90s when it was going through these shifts. Are there any parallels you see to co-living today, and how should what happened back in that stage of your career influence or inform the thinking of developers today?
Yeah, hospitality real estate just has gotten so much more sophisticated in its use and deployment of capital across all of the industry categories. But hospitality, in particular, had maybe the furthest to go because the operating model, I tell people all the time who come and ask me, I have this idea to start a B&B in Napa, and it's going to be so romantic. And I'm like, sort of trying to get them to back up immediately because, a hotel eats money 24/7, 365 days a year. And if you don't get it right, you're going to be on the wrong end of a Pac-Man that is just munching away. And every guest experience is essential to you as a brand and as an individual asset. So you need to make it work. And people began to understand that the best way to start doing that was to parse it out. So originally, hotels were fully owned and occupied, and oftentimes the operators, the major brands, had a lot of money in them, and they were on side with the real estate developer and the both the equity and the debt capital. As we went forward, we began to realize, geez, we could get smarter about managing brand and res systems and demand for the hotel, and maybe get ourselves a little further away from the real estate and capital markets knowledge that is in and of itself an entire industry. And we've seen that trend happen over time, where today probably Hyatt is maybe the last of the big hotel companies that still has real estate embedded in its on its balance sheet, and some of that is a result, really, frankly, of historic accidents of Prop 13, where there's several $1 billion worth of real estate on the Hyatt books that are, at this point, hard to transfer and or painful to transfer. But if you look at Marriott or Hilton, they have stripped out a great deal, if not all, of the real estate Starwood came about because there were 3 or 4 paired share REITs. Those of you who have been around the industry for a while understand what unique beasts those were. They allowed you to own and operate real estate within one entity in a very, very tax efficient way. Barry Sternlicht got a hold of one and built an extraordinary franchise out of it. But even there, over time, they decided they needed to separate the real estate from the operating company. And I think that trend is going to continue. The markets want pure play investment opportunities. So we want to invest in a equity ownership position. We want to invest in a capital debt position. We want to invest in a mezzanine position, or we want to invest in the operator. And few capital sources want to do all of them at the same time. So I see it continuing.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly speaks to, we had a lot of conversations about this early on because we made a strategic decision that we weren't going to own or invest in real estate off our balance sheet. And, that what it really did is it built this ecosystem of third parties that are going out and doing things that are frankly well beyond what we at Common would have the wherewithal to do. I think many of you may have seen the recent announcement of Six Peak working with Cushman Wakefield to go out and raise a $1 billion for co-living development, and there are certainly others out there. So it's been interesting to see how some of the outcomes of these strategic decisions. So you joined the Common board more than 2 years ago. How has the space evolved since you joined? I guess it was summer of 2017.
Yeah, it's evolved quickly. So the first thing I think you have to recognize in getting involved in a company like Common, we're in a long cycle business. It's going to take a while for the markets to understand that co-living as an asset class can be independent of multifamily, that we as a group, everybody here involved in co-living, we need to demonstrate that we can deliver returns that are 100 basis points, 150 basis points or so better than a standard multifamily asset. So I came with the mindset that Brad and his team had a very clear vision for where they wanted to go. We have the advantage of having capital investors in Common, the company, who are committed to the long haul, and albeit less and less patient, really, as they should be, and that it's going to be a classic J curve as we start trying to grow the bed count. And I was asking Brad earlier. We today, I think when I joined, we had about 100 beds actually maybe operating.
Give or take, yeah.
Something like that. We're more than 10 times that size today. And we have, again, 10 times more in our pipeline signed today that will come to fruition in the next 24 to 36 months. So the flywheel is really beginning to spin. At the same time, we as a company have had to get smarter and smarter about thinking about where do we add value. And how do we get smarter about thinking about being an asset class and the best-in-class property manager in that asset class? And I think we're on our way to doing that by virtue of having experimented, frankly. And we started with some assets that were 40, gosh, even smaller, really, 20.
20, yeah.
Yeah, 20 to, 40 beds today. We're focused on things that are much bigger than that, and give us better scale to market. And now we're beginning that process of really building out the technical support for all of you in the room. Where's Sophie? She's, I'm sure, got some role
Hey, Soph.
later. So Sophie running the TSA side of our business, where we're really helping developers get smarter about designing efficient co-living, wherein we can get behind it and think about leasing it in ways to our marketplace that are going to deliver those 100 basis point, 150 basis point differentials in the marketplace vis-a-vis multifamily.
So one elephant in the room is sort of the lack of market trades of co-living assets to date. I mean, you haven't really seen many round trips of capital, and so let's address that straight on, because we talk about the 150 basis point spread kind of going in yields. How do you see that evolving over time? When do you think we'll start establishing those that exit track record of co-living assets? Because it really is brought up on a regular basis as kind of the last piece in some respects.
You probably can graph it out pretty precisely just going and looking at, when significant co-living assets were put in place. Most of these assets at a minimum are going to be held for 3 to 5 years. There may be some trades inside of that, but the majority are going to be 3 to 5 years, and maybe at a minimum, and many of those 5 to 7 and 7 to 10. So it's going to be a slow build. I do think we will see financial result in the performance of the assets earlier than we may see them, trade at more aggressive cap rates or the like. There are going to be, for sure, the one-off trades, and there's enough co-living in the marketplace that we'll begin to see that over the next 6 to 9 months. But it's going to be a thin market for another 18 to 24 months before we can say on a steady state basis there's a differentiated buyer group for co-living assets that want to partner with the commons of the world. I mean, we're at the first innings of a new industry, and there's still, even today, I think people probably in this room, but certainly debt and equity providers, developers who are only still now trying to get their arms around, is this really different? What is different about it? What does it mean to lease beds as opposed to units? How does that impact the wear and tear on a building? How does that impact the maintenance cost of a building? How does that impact go-to-market strategies? And we still really yet haven't fully addressed the maybe one of the biggest inertia items in the marketplace, which is getting municipalities to really understand that this is a unique asset class. And I'm sure for the developers in the room here that, in fact, we can build these with fewer parking spaces, or whatever the constraining factor is in a local market.
Well, parking is certainly a constraint. I don't think I've seen a co-living development pencil yet that needs to be parked 1-to-1 parking spot per bedroom. And we've certainly seen some that that are far flung enough that maybe that's required. So let's talk a bit about that. How cities are thinking about co-living, and one big thing that has, I don't want to say surprised me, but I think it's evolved a lot faster than I expected, is Are cities embracing co-living as a solution to an affordability issue? Many of you saw the news about the Share NYC program in New York, where we're going to be building a 253-bed affordable co-living tower in East Harlem. Would love to get your take on how you see that evolving over time and cities' perceptions of co-living as a threat or as an opportunity.
I hope none of them see it as a threat, and I hope they all embrace it as an opportunity, because we've got, tens of cities that we could list off here today that have serious barrier to entry problems for Gen Z millennials who are trying to come and establish their careers in particular markets. It's absolutely true here. I live probably a third of my time in Los Angeles, actually in Santa Monica, and this city is with the growth of the tech and media, or the confluence of the tech and media activities, the ingrowth here is through the roof, and people's ability to find good housing is really challenged. And I think communities like Santa Monica, Culver City, the whole West Side, frankly, are going to have to figure it out. Silver Lake, Los Feliz, WeHo, they're going to have to figure out how to bring co-living into the marketplace and allow it and embrace it as an asset class. And San Francisco is another great example. New York, what you're doing there is as a demonstration project, frankly. Again, we're at the front end of this, so we've got to, I think we all have to celebrate these 1 and 2 and 3 development activities as being real market shaping and game changing, and things that represent models that we can replicate over time.
So I want to take a bit of a detour, because many of the developers in this room are either looking at short-term rental opportunities, or they're building short-term rental components into their residential buildings. And in several cases, we're actually doing buildings as common that have a short-term rental component that's run by a third-party operator. I'm curious to get your take, as someone with a hospitality background, on the rise of Sonder, Guild, Lyric. What's your take, and what do you see the staying power there?
Well, again, this goes back to that continuum of the way people are going to occupy real estate. So if you're an Accenture, McKinsey, BCG consultant, LEK consultant, and you're going every week to Dallas or Denver, Guild represents a really interesting solution to your housing problem. I can rent these on a daily, weekly basis. They come with fully staffed kitchens. I can leave my stuff there because I know I'm coming back, maybe not next week, but the week after. And I think that there are going to continue to be a lot of very creative entrepreneurs who take advantage of technology to create demand generation engines that are going to allow the Guilds and the Sonders of the world to continue to build a marketplace. And I think multifamily residential developers are going to find this to be a really good way to rent, in particular, maybe some of their less desirable units on a short-term basis with a slightly higher ROI on that individual unit, and put the operating responsibility with somebody else. So I see this trend continuing. The demand side, your point in your opening remarks about us responding very quickly to inquiries. We have demand that is multiples of what we can begin to think about supplying today. And I actually think that's a huge asset for Common over time, but probably a source of frustration for people who are registering with us today, for whom we just can't meet the demand. I'm sure Guild and Sonder have that same sort of phenomenon, and they're going to find a way in the marketplace.
Yeah, we send company metrics on a monthly basis to the board, and one of those, I remember the first time you got those, you saw the month. We have a trailing 90-day number of applications we've gotten, and today it's like 50,000 applicants. And I remember you looking at it and just saying, "What the hell? You have like 200 beds at the time, maybe 10,000 applications. Like it's kind of an absurd ratio, and continues to be." So just continuing on the STR note for a second, because we do have a lot of people in this room who own a wide variety of assets. If you're a hospitality owner operator today, how do you think about responding in the face of some of these competitive challenges?
Well, we're watching them respond. I mean, Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt are all either building or buying brands that are in the medium-term stay. I mean, there's an entire hotel company called Extended Stay that was actually purpose-built for this kind of mid-market 7 to 10 day stay. And I think all of them will look to create product that's positioned to meet the demand continuum that's coming to them in the marketplace. And so recognize what's happening is technology is giving hospitality companies, it's giving real estate operating companies such as Common and others greater visibility into the demand or into the needs of the public they're trying to serve. So if you're my buddy Mark Hoplamazian at Hyatt, who's the CEO there, or Chris Nassetta at Hilton, you're going to be thinking about, all right, how do I deploy my assets, which are pretty well located by and large in almost every major urban market? How am I on the margin going to supply those into a slightly different audience niche? So I was the CEO of Hyatt when Hotels.com, Travelocity, Expedia all showed up. I actually was a founder of Orbitz in response to that. And we all thought in the beginning, naively, oh, this is genius. We can give away 3 or 4% giveaway, not literally, but we can set aside 3 or 4% of our inventory and make it available to these other distribution sources, because these are not our customers. And they're not people that are otherwise in the Hyatt system. Well, it was no more than a year, and probably closer to 8 months, when our largest client, who at that point in time was IBM PwC, showed up and said, oh, by the way, as a national matter, we want that internet rate. And I'm like, whoa. That is for the guy behind the curtain. That's not meant for our, our mainstay clients, but we inadvertently created total transparency of pricing. The majority of the people in this room are not old enough to remember, but it used to be you would get on an airplane and you might own a ticket for $100 to get someplace, and the person sitting next to you was paying $500. And there was no transparency in the marketplace. Same was true of room 101 versus room 102 your favorite Hyatt hotel. That stuff is all going away, and what we're figuring out is a yield management matter. We need to run higher occupancies more efficiently, and that means that we're going to have to serve up the product broadly to a slightly wider than just a group meeting or transient marketplace. And they're all getting smarter at it. I mean, there's just no two ways about it.
So I'm glad we're spending this time on hospitality, because hospitality and the idea of creating a branded space was a huge influence to us in the early days of Common. I'm curious your take on the role of brands in residential, because nobody's really done it to date. You've had short term, where you do have strong brands, strong loyalty programs, right, versus long term, where you go to an average person on the street and ask them to name a brand of apartment building. They'll probably struggle to do that.
Right.
How do you think about the role of brands in the future of residential?
I think they're going to be ever so much more important, frankly. Brand, just flat out, is more important to everybody's decision making. And there's so many ways technologically people can get to you with their brand, and they build a bit of mind share with you. And so I do believe that for multifamily companies, there is going to be a brand, several brands probably, that emerge as these residential REITs and other holding companies get bigger and bigger and are operating in multiple markets. And they're going to stand for something. They're going to stand for a service level that's differentiated. They're going to operate a concierge activity that's differentiated. They're going to build a community within their properties that's differentiated. They're all going to figure out, and I think most of them at this point have experimented with different forms of technology delivery into the asset itself. And so it is going to matter. And frankly, in a world where millennials and Gen Zs are far more mobile, less likely to own earlier in their lives, and then being able to move at the drop of a hat, to move from Dallas to Los Angeles to San Francisco, and maybe all with the same company, or maybe it's because you're looking at different opportunities, or maybe it's because you're a participant in the gig economy and you're kind of surfing opportunities. Being able to move efficiently between assets, where the asset operator is going to allow you that flexibility and say, what we're most interested in is you being a common customer. So whether you buy from us in Los Angeles or you buy from us in Boston or New York, we're somewhat indifferent, and we're going to accommodate, helping you make that relocation. That's absolutely coming.
Well, it is a real point of tension that we deal with, and it will always be a point of tension of localization versus standardization. And this is something the hotel industry has gone back and forth on for a long time. How much do you want to make the experience completely consistent across every building, every geography, versus making the LA experience an LA experience versus a New York or Boston or DC or Seattle experience? Perhaps tell the audience a little bit about how the hotel industry has balanced.
Well, I think one of the and maybe not talked about often, but one of the most striking examples of that has been somewhat the impairment of Four Seasons. So if you went back to Four Seasons hotels as they were coming up with Izzy Sharp leading them in the 80s and 90s, one of the elements about them that were so compelling was they were predictable. They were going to be Queen Anne chairs, whether it was in the Toronto hotel or, heaven forbid, sadly, in the Bali hotel. And they had the exact same look, but it made their customer base at that point in time really comfortable that the look, feel, service delivery was going to be consistent. You fast forward 25 years later, people really want indigenous experiences. They don't want to feel like they're in Toronto when they're in Bali. And they want it to feel indigenous. However, they do have a service level expectation. And so you've got to meet that, but you've got to meet that in a way that's interpreted for the local community. And that's one of the things that I think if we watch Airbnb as they develop this whole concierge service, that's what they're really focused on. We're going to give you a room in the East Village, but at the same time, we're going to give you a very bespoke list of, here is that great coffee shop that's not a national brand, that's 2 blocks away from you. Here's a special place to get a, sandwich or salad that you're not likely to have stumbled on, etc. And those are the kinds of experiences that people want today. They still want it to meet a standard, but they want it to feel indigenous to the market that they're experiencing.
Well, it's interesting because as you were saying that, I was almost thinking about it as a hedge to the increasing standardization of inventory on Airbnb's platform. I mean, it's really not the spare bedroom in, some nice couple's house anymore. It's the Sonder, it's the Lyric, it's the Guild. And so needing to provide that kind of bespoke, localized environment as really a almost counterweight to a standardization of inventory they need to get scale.
Yeah.
So on that note, one thing you said to me a few years ago when we were talking about experimentation is every hospitality flag has its cats and dogs, and that really stuck with me. So tell me a little bit, and Hyatt's obviously a very operationally intensive business. How do you think about maintaining consistency and quality of experience during scale and at scale?
It probably singularly is the most difficult job of any of the senior managers of a particular brand at any one of the hospitality companies. So think about what's happened. You have a brand standard that is for, let's take one that's more recent, a W hotel. So the W's were built, they're a genius idea. This was a Sternlicht idea. They are both purpose-built hotels, but in the beginning, they were conversion assets. So essentially, you could go in. I don't know how many people here would be familiar with the Delano, which was one of the first conversions, but it was a Philippe Stark and Ian Schrager asset. They bought a cheap hotel in South Beach in Miami. They spray painted it white. Literally.
It's a great story.
Spray painted the entire thing white. Fixtures, everything in the room, clock radios. The whole thing was white. They put white sheets all through the lobby. and basically didn't change anything else. And it went from a transient hotel that probably got an average of something under $100 a night to something that was very, very hip and cool and got something probably approaching $1,000 a night today, with very little in the way of actual investment made. So W comes along and says that we're going to do that, and we're going to take conversion assets and we're going to make them into W's. And then ultimately those take off, people identify with them, and they say, well, we're going to build some purpose-built W's. Well, now, instead of going to a conversion hotel where the bathroom in one may be fully expansive, and the bathroom in the next one you stay in is, stamp size, and versus a hotel where it was purpose-built, where every unit looks precisely like the next. And then you couple that with the fact that these are now all owned by different owners, and they're financed with different capital and debt structures, and that we all kind of as an industry are not fully true to ourselves about what it really costs to maintain these assets. We set aside 3 to 4% of revenue, but probably every 7 years they need it. Every 9 years it actually happens. There's a major renovation. So you always have assets that are within a category of hotel that are leading. I mean, they're the newest ones you added. They're the flagships of that class of hotel. And then there are ones that are laggards because they were the first ones, and maybe they were conversions, and so they aren't quite as elegant. And that's a reality. We at Hyatt had one funny anomaly that still exists today. We are a domestic convention center hotel company. I mean, when you really cut through where we make money, it's in our big boxes in big cities. Very different than Hilton or Marriott, which are much more transient hotel companies. We then built Hyatt International, and we built these trophy assets, and we called them Grand Hyatts and Park Hyatts. But our hotel in New York City, the Grand Hyatt, which is a 2,000-room factory, I mean, it's just monstrous hotel, was called the Grand Hyatt, but it's because we didn't own the Regency Hyatt name in New York City. There's a funny story to be told about why we didn't, but we didn't. And so we would have, and then as travel got to be more global, we'd have people flying from Hong Kong and showing up and saying, wait a minute, we just left the Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong. It's this elegant 500-room hotel with 6 restaurants and fabulous service and standards, and you just put us into a very big factory-like experience that really is not on a service level even remotely equivalent to the Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong, except we called them the same thing. And so every company's got those anomalies that they're trying to work out. We have them in that as we started Common, we had to start somewhere. I mean, you just didn't get the first opportunities we were presented with or were able to make work in the marketplace were not, 200-bed, 150-bed, perfectly laid out with outdoor lounge areas and the like. And so, but that's the reality. And those are as valuable to us on a per unit basis as anything else. We just need to recognize that we're always going to have a bit of a continuum of inventory under our operation, and that's a simple fact.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to see the wide range of assets. We set this challenge out for ourselves a few years ago of, basically opening a building every month. And many of those had very different layouts, very different kind of arrangements of amenity space, unit typologies. And the net result of that was a lot of learning, and a lot of learning that we've incorporated into many of the designs going forward. So it was, I always think about the cats and dogs thing. It's very true. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to wrap up. Many of the people out here are developers, investors, people thinking of either currently building co-living or thinking about investing co-living. If you were to give a word of advice to people diving into this space today and really looking to make a bet or evaluating whether or not to make a bet, what would you say, and how would you guide them through those decisions?
So the first thing I'd say is go visit a bunch of these. And we should make them ours available to you. You should see them in 3D, and you should see them in operation, and you should understand the profile of our leasing activity and what it took to get them filled, and what it looks like on an operational basis month over month in terms of managing turnover. Secondly, I'd say engage with us. And push us so that you're getting the best from us, because that's what we want to give to you, and we really do want to earn your business. And I think we obviously have become believers, firm believers, in this as a unique asset class, but we need to earn that with each of you individually in a very real and tactical way. Those would probably be the two best. I mean, we can model. Yeah, I would say those are the two best approaches to it.
No, I completely agree. And one thing I often see developers do that really accelerates a conversation and learning is look at a specific site. Even if you don't know if it's going to be the perfect site for co-living, it's often really helpful just from a learning perspective to say, hey, I've already underwritten this site for traditional residential or for hospitality or for what have you. Let's look at it apples to apples with co-living. That can really serve to accelerate a conversation, take it to the next level, and really help build a shared understanding of what does this look like, what are we like to work with, and how are we going to look at any particular asset. So I often encourage people to not only come out and see the assets, but actually start. I mean, we have a whole team of designers, architects, analysts who focus on underwriting to really look at those assets, look at those sites, and provide that pattern recognition of, hey, here's what we think will work on this site. And in many cases, it's a mix of co-living studios, ones. Let's blend in some units and create something really special.
Yeah, one of the things, and I gave a shout out to Sophie earlier, but one of the things that has been, and I give Brad and his team a lot of credit for this, is we are a new industry and we are learning new things, but we are very good as a company, if I can make this observation from a board seat, at capturing that learning. And one of the ways that we've probably most productively done that is reflected in the whole group that does the TSA and this kind of support, design support, really helping you think about on a specific site what a program would look like, how it would be differentiated from what a multifamily product might look like on the exact same site, how, if it's appropriate, you might blend co-living and multifamily. And then we actually have while we don't have, as Brad alluded to earlier, 25, 30, 40, 50, and ultimately thousands of full trip experiences demonstrating that co-living will yield greater financial results, we have enough to be able to understand that we can design assets and lease them in a more efficient manner than a traditional multifamily in many locations, and getting under the hood and really doing the work early on to understand what the site might yield is probably the best way to have a tangible, real-world conversation about making a comparison.
Well said. Scott, thank you so much for your time here today. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
My name is Amalia Paleobase. I'm the Senior Director of Real Estate for the West Coast at Common. Very excited to be here. I'm based out of the LA office, so it's always fun to see people in the city of Los Angeles working to learn more about co-living. So would love to see, from a show of hands, people that are currently developing or owning co-living right now. Cool. And people that are interested in it, or at least developing it. Exciting. Okay, so there's no question that over the past even months, if not years, co-living has gained a lot more interest from developers, investors, and lenders, as evidenced by our pipeline, which increased by over 3 times in the last, I'd say, 9 months, and now we're well over 10,000, now about 12,000 beds in our pipeline. So we're really excited about that. And so we have a great group of panelists here who I'll let introduce themselves so we can talk a little bit more about developing co-living and what goes on with that. So Daniel, if you could get us started, and how you have worked with Common.
My name is Daniel Alexander. I'm the co-founder of Domos Co-Living. And I started my career here in Los Angeles. And after 2007, I started venturing out across the country, buying larger multifamily communities. And now Domos Co-Living is headquartered in Atlanta. And we've been working with Common over the last year or so, and they've been great for us. I just saw Simon out here in the hallway, and I just mentioned to him that we could not do this without them. Their expertise is invaluable. So,
hi there. I'm Derek Sanders, Director of Development at 6 Peak Capital. I oversee the day-to-day operation of the development of our 7 co-living deals here in Los Angeles. Common is pretty much our exclusive chosen operator at this point here in LA.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Elia Thompson. I'm a land use attorney, partner with Irvin Cohen and Jessup. Common is a client of the firms, as well as several other co-living entities in the city of Los Angeles. I've been working with Common for at least a year and a half, navigating the city's regulatory issues in regards to fire department, building and safety, housing, health department, and so forth. And we can go into that a little bit more in the program about these different agencies and what their view on co-living is and how to stay within the confines of these agencies' regulations as they are today.
Hi, my name is Patrick Tai. I have a firm called Tai Architecture here in Los Angeles. We do a lot of housing, and we do a lot of co-living housing. We have several projects with Common, I think 6 projects in development. One's finishing up, and a few are under construction, and several are in entitlements. And I'm happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. So Derek, 6 Peak was one of the first to build co-living at scale in the United States and was one of the earliest partners with Common. What got you comfortable with the strategy so quickly?
I guess we kind of started from a early perspective of being in on the ground level, never really having done a other type of project. We pretty much jumped on the bandwagon of co-living and built a firm around building and financing co-living from day one.
Cool. And then Daniel, your strategy focuses on Atlanta, but now you're looking at some other cities as well. How did your team get investors and lenders comfortable with co-living outside of the primary LA, San Francisco, New York?
yeah, we talk about the primary gateway markets. I mean, there's still 275 million people plus around the country fast fast urbanization happening in all those other cities. And so for us, it was a no-brainer. My current portfolio over the past 10 years has been in multifamily throughout the Southeast and in various markets around the country. And we've noticed that people are already roommating in those 3 bedrooms and those 2 bedrooms. And so for us, the comfort was already there. And then the education process with capital markets is still ongoing. So we're doing that still.
And I want to open this question to the entire group. In your experience, what has been or is the biggest hurdle or challenge to developing a co-living project today, whether if you're on the legal side, just what you see or what you've actually faced?
I'll take it. I guess co-living's new. I mean, it's still a a hyphenated phrase. We're waiting for it to be a proper noun. I mean, that education process needs to continue, and so that's probably the biggest hurdle. But getting out there and engaging the community, engaging the municipalities and things like that, and the summits like this, where we business to business people involved in co-living can grow the education process, I think is most important and one of the hurdles that we're addressing.
And I can answer that question from a design aspect. Obviously, we're building at a greater density, so to be able to create quality units that have windows and light and air and all those things are of course very important. So sometimes there's certain design challenges that come along with designing co-living. So it really is kind of a puzzle. Common has great standards that they've developed over time. And sometimes it's challenging to meet the needs of the developer and the needs of Common to give everybody exactly what they want.
So I think one of the challenges I have as a land use attorney is, I think the number one thing that clients hate to hear from a lawyer is, well, maybe you could if this, but not if this. And unfortunately, I can't give concrete assurance to some of the co-living developers out there that absolutely it's 100% allowed, there will never be an issue, the neighbors won't have any issues, the city won't have any issues, and you'll be fine. What I can say is, first of all, we're not introducing a new use. This is multifamily residential, period. And that's what we say, and we've talked about that in our meetings with the city agencies. It's multifamily use. Whether it's 2 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, up to 6 bedrooms, it's still multifamily use. I will tell you that I've had several conversations with agencies in the last week, just kind of going back to some of my contacts to prepare for this panel and just make sure that they're still on the same page and there are internal policies. I love how the city of Los Angeles, all their agencies have all these internal unwritten policies that they somehow expect us to know osmosis. It really makes it fun being a land use attorney in this town. But in regards to the main agencies that are involved, building and safety. Building and safety cares about what you're building, whether or not the use is allowed. It is. It's multifamily. They care about parking. For the most part, up to 4 bedrooms, it's 2 parking spaces. However, please do not think that that's what the code says. We're good, we're done, we've checked that box. The city of Los Angeles has something like 35 community plans and another 20-something specific plans. There's also a number of queue conditions, delimitations, I could go on and on. So you have to be very careful in some of these neighborhoods, especially Hollywood-centric, the areas around USC, the areas around UCLA. They will ding you if you're doing more than 4 bedrooms. Suddenly you're going to be upped in parking. And they sometimes will require design review processes if you try and go above 5 bedrooms. So again, a lot of these were implemented in these areas to keep a lot of times the houses around these universities from being divided. But they do come into play for multifamily. So going back to some of the issues, I can't always give 100% assurance, but I can tell you based on my experience, based on the fact that my clients have a lot of these projects that are already up and moving forward. And also, I don't know that any of us in this room really want to be pushing the city to come up with more regulations and more guidelines because we know they're not going to make our lives easier or more simplistic. So what I would say is make sure that when you're looking at your due diligence that you look at everything, not just the code. You're looking at the specific plan, community plan, everything that's involved in that. And then you're also touching base with someone who has experience that can tell you what the housing regs are, the fire department regs are, health department, and that sort of stuff, which we can get into later. So just, again, looking at it holistically, for the most part, this use is allowed in the city of LA. You just have to be careful.
And just to follow up on that, I guess because there's so many, regulatory agencies in LA restricting land use, finding good zoning and a deal that actually makes sense is actually a really, really serious challenge here. We've had, one project get appealed through the TOC process, and it did come up in that hearing about the number of bedrooms and the density. At least we have a planning commission that's currently in favor of bedroom density, and they have been outspoken about co-living as a potential, affordable use. But we are going to end up in NIMBY land on a lot of these projects. So,
Thank you. Patrick, you're working on a handful of co-living projects in LA. How did you get involved in some of the first co-living projects here, and how do you see the market, LA and nationally, evolving in the future?
Well, we first were involved. Some developers approached us about doing co-living. My firm is very much interested in housing in general. We do a lot of affordable housing for nonprofit developers, market rate. We're always looking at new ways to respond to our housing crisis. So the co-living seemed like an area of great interest. So we were very much interested. And the first project we did with Commons several years ago is now finishing up, and that led to several others. We're doing a project with Six Peak, a few projects with Six Peak actually. So it's kind of evolved, and yeah, we love doing them.
Do you have any kind of idea of what co-living will look like in the future in terms of design, or what you're seeing that works?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at it, from the inside out and the outside in, right? Like Common does a great job with their product and what the feel for the environment is, and the quality control of the units. So that's all one way of looking at the project, and then there's the from the city point of view, every lot is different. Like was just mentioned, every neighborhood is different. So there is an opportunity for these things to have their own character and identity from site to site, but yet keep the standards that Common has intact.
While we're on the topic of working with cities, I want to ask Elia how you are thinking about, well, what should these developers be thinking about in terms of who their operators are? Is there any go, no-go in terms of how we operate co-living?
Well, I'll go back to what I had mentioned in terms of talking to the agency. So basically, the first agency you start with is housing. And I had a very candid conversation with a senior inspector at housing and said, look, let me just make sure I have this straight. As long as we don't have anyone who's sleeping outside of a bedroom, outside of a designated bedroom, and as long as that bedroom has a working, operable smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector and has proper windows, ingress, egress out of the room, we're fine, correct? And he said, yes, you are correct. He said, as long as we don't have people sleeping in closets, living rooms, dining rooms, and so forth, he says, because the minute we walk in and we see a unit partitioned, whether it's temporary partitions or actual structural walls, we flag you right away, and you go right away to the red flag, is what he said, in terms of severity of potential hazard. So if you have 2-3 people in a bedroom, whatever it is, to a certain extent, as long as you also have your paths of travel clear, so your hallways are clear, you can't have armoires and boxes and furniture and so forth in your closet, in your hallways and your living rooms and so forth. As long as you have a clear path of travel, that's what housing focuses on. And I do want to make it clear, too, that there are several state and federal laws, and there's case law, that the state does not have the right to define a family. So in terms of familiar size, familiar relationships, that kind of stuff, the city agencies will be very careful. They should be very careful because they can't regulate that stuff. The other thing to do, the other thing to be aware of is fire department. So for the most part, fire department looks at ingress egress and the totality of the structure. But as we were talking earlier, right before this panel, fire department's actually getting a little bit more difficult to navigate. They used to give you certain modifications for your project. Like let's say your driveway fire lane was open to the sky up to the 3rd floor, but then wasn't for a part of that. They would sometimes allow you to modify that if the fire lane was wider. Things like that. They'd work with you. They're not working with you as easily as they used to, and they're also concerned. Not so much for the structure and the model that Common has in terms of 1 up to 2 people per bedroom. But there are some co-living folks out there that are actually proposing up to 4 or even 6 per bedroom. That will start to get the fire department a little concerned more and more in terms of ingress egress. Because if you have a 4-bedroom apartment and you would think that there's somewhere between 4 and 8 people, just in general, living in that 4-bedroom apartment, and let's say you've got 10 of those 4-bedroom apartments, in a small complex, you're thinking, okay, that's somewhere between 40 and 80 people. Well, not if it's 4 people per bedroom. Now you're looking at, say, up to 160 people trying to get out of a building that only has 1 or 2 exits. So I think fire department may be a place where we could run into a little bit of a push in the future, depending on your model. Again, I don't see that happening with Commons model, but for others that have a different model, that may prove to be a little bit difficult. Do you want to say anything about fire department as well?
That's helpful. Shifting away from LA, Daniel, you partnered with Invest Atlanta, the City of Atlanta's economic development arm, to deliver a portion of Domos's 345-bed co-living project to be attainable for working professionals. How did this conversation start, and what made this partnership successful?
Full disclosure, what made that partnership successful was my partner, Derek Barker. He had a phenomenal relationship with the city before Domos's formation. And so all the work that he's been doing there in the city made the relationship just natural for Domos, number one. Number two, both of us have a lengthy track record of providing affordable housing throughout the state of Georgia. So I've done thousands of apartment conversions in the Class C space all over the state and in the Southeast, and so had Derek. And so that track record of success made it easy and also made us a welcome partner for someone who was very knowledgeable in that space and knowing the clientele and understanding what the needs were. So.
Derek, when you're looking at a ground-up co-living project, what financial metrics do you typically target, or zoning considerations when you're evaluating a site or a project's viability?
On the financing side, we usually try to back into around a 7% return on cost, if not higher. It really just depends on the site and some of the constraints. I guess on the building side, right now we're at least trying to do projects at about 80 units, if not more. We were doing smaller deals, but we feel that the market's moved on and is willing to accept a more institutional quality size building. So I think in the future you'll start to see larger 100-plus bedroom co-living projects coming on.
Have you seen a difference between the sub-50 unit projects in terms of timing and kind of the larger unit projects that you're trying to develop?
Like delivery and like speed to market, or?
Speed to market.
Yeah, so we have I guess our 31-bed project in North Hollywood has about a 10-month turnaround from start of construction to substantial completion. Probably a larger 100-plus bed is going to be around 16 months. If you start adding subterranean parking, that could go on a little bit longer. So for us, I think it's sort of finding that sweet spot between trying to prove concept at scale and then also getting bed size and bed count.
What about anything different with the city, kind of pre-development, or you see the same timeline for both of those?
With the City of LA, once you exceed 50 units, so not actually bedrooms, you're going to go into a process called site plan review, which is an entitlement. For us, we're trying to be up against that threshold, but not actually push past it, because then you're looking at an entitlement of at least, probably 4 to 8 months, depending on how big your site is and other required items from the city. So, for us, I think it's kind of being a little under the radar, but, still large enough.
The other thing I want to say about site plan review is now you're subject to public hearings. and you're subject to having to put forth your entire floor plans and all design elements to the public. So you will most certainly get certain communities coming out wanting to review everything with a microscope. So it's not a reason not to do them, but it is definitely a reason to pause and make sure that it's worth it to go above that 49 unit threshold, because again, it's much different than having a plan checker and a senior structural engineer at Building and Safety looking over and saying, yeah, I'm fine with these 49 units of 5 to 6 bedrooms apiece, versus actually having to go to a public hearing and having people say, you know, all kinds of things. Or why on earth are you doing 6-bedroom units for apartment buildings? And it, some of these neighborhoods, Valley Village comes to mind. By the way, everything's a village in the city of Los Angeles. We've got Valley Village and Brentwood Village, and they all talk about being these little bucolic little pockets of neighborhood feel-goods. And I'm like, well, sure, but we're still in the city of Los Angeles, and we have, you know, 5-6 million people we need to house. But anyway, but you will see much more intense community scrutiny over your projects that have site plan review.
Let's see. Okay, so, well, Elia, with your experience working in LA, what can developers do to get co-living to be recognized as an affordable housing solution, similar to Daniel partnering with Invest Atlanta, so that it can be recognized as an affordable housing solution in LA and ideally other cities? To give you background on this, we actually just partnered with Share NYC to build one of the first capital A affordable co-living projects in the city, and it would be recognized at, I think it's between 80 to 120% of AMI.
Well, that brings into a couple questions of whether or not developers of co-living want to be affordable housing. I have a phrase that I tend to use in a lot of these hearings where I call it attainable housing. Because, you know, the problem you have in Los Angeles with affordable housing units is that you have increased oversight of the housing department. And when you have projects, look, when you have projects that have studio, 1, maybe 2 bedrooms, but now we're starting to kind of get to that place of family units. Studios and 1 bedrooms, you still maintain a lot of control. Right? You decide who your tenants are. Your tenants have to qualify. They have to have the income qualifications in order to be deemed, you know, tenants that qualify for an affordable unit. And you have to go through a lot of paperwork with the housing department. But you pick your tenants. You decide who's going to live in your studios and 1 bedrooms. When you get to sometimes 2 bedrooms, and most certainly 3 and 4 bedrooms, there becomes a ton of pressure on you to take certain families that have been on wait lists a really long time with housing department. And it becomes more difficult for you to really be able to determine who your tenants are going to be. And I don't believe, and you weigh in if I'm wrong, I don't believe that housing department allows you to take an affordable unit and divide it up among the bedrooms, and then each of those bedrooms are a certain amount. It is for the whole unit. So if the maximum, and I want to say something like for a 3-bedroom, I think the maximum in the city of Los Angeles they take it from HUD, HUD in the state. I think the maximum is something like $900 bucks for a month for a 3-bedroom. It's something like that. I don't think we've hit 1,000.
Depending on the income level of like which qualification tier, right? So we have like multiple
Yes.
tiers. So it could be 900, but sometimes in like extremely low income, it could be as low as like $300 or $400.
Yeah, it's really low, but most of the time you're doing very low. That tends to be the matrix low or very low. You're talking like $900 bucks for a 3-bedroom unit, and if you have housing putting pressure on you that you have to take somebody on their list. You've now, you know, you don't control all the aspects to your project, which, in my opinion, for a lot of my clients, doesn't really work.
Derek and Daniel, when you've both kind of looked at investing and are developing co-living in multiple cities, how do you decide a city or an area works for co-living? What metrics do you look at?
I guess back to this land use discussion within LA, I mean, we're so limited based on zoning that ultimately we are backing into areas that have zoning that works. It's also a function of being somewhat dense too. So in the city of LA, usually the areas that do have density and zoning that actually can support co-living, you are closer to transit, which I think we as a company, you know, want to invest in areas that have transit that are walkable, and also you could jump into an Uber or Lyft and be in a job center within 10 minutes. So
So we are too looking at areas that are fast urbanizing and also areas that we have a track record in. So we have a deep history in Georgia, and also I started my career here in California. So I have a lot of resources here already locally. I understand the landscape here, and so those are natural fits for what we're trying to do. So.
I'm going to ask one last question for the entire group, and then we can open it up to questions. What excites you the most about developing co-living, and will you be developing more co-living in the future, or will you be working on more co-living projects in the future?
I guess what excites me the most is how Domos Co-Living values our company. We judge our social value, which is the sum of the environmental, economic, and social benefit that we provide to the community. And so through co-living, we can really address this national crisis of affordable housing. And so for us, just being a part of that, addressing this great problem I guess this great crisis that our nation is currently in, and we see it around the world. I mean, income and rents are just going in the opposite direction, have been for decades. We're just excited to be a part of that. So that makes us excited, I guess, to be a part of co-living in the future.
Also agree. I guess similarly, I think I came from a multifamily company, building studios for, renting for $30, $200 a month. Back in the co-living, it's a product that ultimately, much greater portion of the population can actually afford and live there. So just thinking about the number of end users is greatly increased versus when you're building what equates to a high-end luxury product.
I concur, and from a design perspective, I find co-living very exciting because not only is it a great product, but there's a demand for quality design as well, and that's something that helps sell the product, but it's also something that helps improve the quality of the spaces. So that's all good on my end.
I have probably several calls a month of new potential clients who are looking to get into the co-living space. I want to go back to the last questions. I don't think I really answered it properly in terms of what can we do to show that we're providing what I call attainable housing and being a real community partner. I think that is where each of the co-living operators, their brand, their reputation is so incredibly crucial at this early stage of the game. We need to be able to, every time we're in front of Planning Commission, have an industry that has a really strong, stellar reputation. We provide great product. We provide an enormous benefit, not just in terms of housing, but creating communities. And I think that that's important, that perhaps the industry band together and really work hard to have some industry standards and to showcase just how strong they are in the community, how much of a benefit they are in the community, so you can drown out the negativity of people coming in and saying, gee, I don't want more density in my village neighborhood, and gee, there's just too much parking, or there's too much this, or there's too much that. So that's where I think that you can really become a great partner and become really strong in these types of planning and zoning meetings, especially when you have somebody who's going to come through and do a 250 400 unit project. So let's start building the brand and let's start building the reputation now.
Great. And I'll open it up to questions. Joel?
You have leases on individual bedrooms, and evict for non-payment are you subject to rent control for those bedroom leases?
So I'm going to restate the question so everybody can hear. Can you have leases by the bedroom? Can you evict by the bedroom? And what was the last one? Are you subject to rent control? We do not have leases by the bedroom. We lease one lease per unit, so everybody's on the same lease.
So to be clear, I'm a land use lawyer, not a real estate lease lawyer. So I don't know of a reason why you couldn't have a lease per bedroom. I will tell you that you can evict for a bedroom because you're evicting to get possession of the premises. So you can certainly evict if someone isn't paying their rent in terms of their bedroom. And I have clients who our real estate department has created leases per bedroom. So we certainly have done it. I don't know that there's any kind of case law that says that we can't, but I can tell you can evict for non-payment and you can get possession of that bedroom. And then in terms of rent control or rent stabilization, for the city of Los Angeles and then other rent control, that's for the entire unit. So the rent that you charge for the totality of the unit, let's say it's a 3-bedroom, and let's say for argument's sake your $1,200 is your maximum. You can't have the totality of the rents that you're collecting individually hit more than the $1,200 mark, period. So you can't just say, well, each of them pay less than $1,200. That's not the rule. So I hope I answered that.
And if I could just add on to that, sometimes when we go to the city at the very beginning of these projects, we'll do a case management meeting, and oftentimes they'll say, is this a boarding house? Or is this a flex space, right? Those are the two things that always come up. The thing about the boarding house is they do rent by room, and that's the city wants to make sure that that is actually not the case. And that's where I think by renting by apartment, it doesn't fall into that boarding house category with the city. So that might be another consideration.
Questions? I'll take you in front.
Assuming that people are going to come and go, how do you get one adult to sign knowing he's joint and several responsible for the other 3 people? And if the other 3 or 2 or one of them skip, he has to pay that rent. And how does that work? Because I can't see any adult doing that. And the second part is if you could talk about parking and what the experience has been for this demographic to need a car in different markets.
Okay, so this question was around joint and several liability for common members. Not necessarily asking the panelists questions, but I'll answer it quickly and we can talk offline. We do background checks and credit checks for everybody, and then they all sign the same lease, but they also sign a separate lease that says you are responsible only, or separate agreement that you're only responsible for the portion of your rent, and common won't go after you if a roommate has an issue. And then we can touch base on other stuff after.
And the parking?
We have seen parking in LA, non-transit oriented areas, around 60% of the members have cars. Other questions? In the back?
Excuse me. How much pushback are you getting from potential owners, developers on the issue of buying the furniture and being responsible for the furniture as the owner?
I'll let Derek answer this question. So how do you think about paying for FF&E when you're looking at an investment in co-living?
I mean, we've just kind of underwritten it as a requirement to make the deal work. It's a pain point of communal living, of having roommates and who buys furniture for what room. So we've always just understood it as being a requirement to actually make the deal pencil and be functional as a result of, density and strangers sharing spaces.
Are you doing certain developments that are not one-to-one, and how are those performing versus the ones that are one-to-one?
So let me restate the question so everybody can hear. The question was around bedroom to bathroom ratios and how they're thinking about it.
Ideally, it's one-to-one, but sometimes you have spaces that just don't have the amount of, plumbing, and you just can't really route as many bathrooms as you'd like to. So we try to get as close as we can to a one-to-one ratio in all our projects. We think that's the easiest to get someone to be convinced to live in a co-living situation versus, traditional multi.
Daniel, how are you looking at it?
Yeah, I find the same in the Southeast. We strive to do all ensuite bathrooms as a requirement. Sometimes, like Derek said, you can't get it done, and you just try to make the best of the situation. But our goal is to have 100% ensuite.
Patrick, are you seeing anything different in terms of what you're designing? But
No, I think we have about 1,000 co-living beds in the office, and I think probably 90% have ensuite bathrooms associated with the bedrooms.
we have a pretty big mix at Common. We do both shared and ensuite. But okay, any other questions? Up front here.
I'm trying to have shared space on the window wall. Is that important, not important?
So how is everybody looking at kind of the shared space, kitchen and living area within a unit of a co-living unit?
Well, I can answer that. It really depends on it varies via developer. Common has their standards, but developers also have their quota, and it varies. So some are more generous, others are not. Some provide the bare minimum, whereas others go over and beyond and provide more than is needed. So it varies.
see any unique CEQA issues or vulnerabilities for purpose-built co-living?
The question was, do you foresee any unique CEQA issues related to co-living?
The only issue I really see at this point is potentially traffic and parking. Because again, if it's not really so much the one person per bedroom model, but when you're getting into 2 or even 4 people per bedroom, and you've got a project that has 4 to 6 bedrooms, and let's say you've got 20 of these units, you could potentially come into a place where your traffic counts. So usually your traffic counts are when you're adding more than 50 units online. So you had a 10-unit apartment building, you're ripping it down and you're putting a 60-unit apartment building. You've now triggered the need to do a full traffic report, traffic and circulation report. Recently, the county and the city are actually bringing that down a little bit more into the high 30s, 40 increase in units. So I could foresee in the future, if we're doing a project that has 6, 7 bedrooms, increase from, previously what was there was like 1 or 2 bedrooms, and we don't do a traffic report, or we don't do a parking study and an analysis. I could see, look, it's a cottage industry of these ambulance chasing CEQA lawyers that go after every single project they possibly can in terms of CEQA. So I could foresee that being a problem. How we get ahead of that is something I think we need to think about, and maybe we preempt it. Maybe we go ahead and do traffic study, or maybe we go ahead and do a parking study. It's certainly something we can talk offline.
Would you advise your clients to disclose that they're thinking of doing co-living at the time of environmental analysis?
Again, I think it depends on the type of co-living. If it were a client like Common and they're putting 1, 2 max per bedroom, no, because that is what multifamily residential use is supposed to be. It's supposed to be 1 to 2 people per bedroom. Clients that are doing much more than that, it's certainly a conversation I would have with them to hey, let's run the numbers, let's see what we have in terms of parking. But that's where Derek and I had a conversation right before we were coming up here, and he says he's done projects where they were doing, would you say 6, even up to 7 bedrooms? 6 bedrooms, and they did not get any kind of, flag raised, alarm sounded by the city. I'm seeing projects that have 5 bedrooms or more for apartment buildings getting flagged and getting discussed by the city agencies. And again, if you've got someone who's putting 4 people per bedroom and they're doing 5, 6 bedrooms, it's certainly a conversation I would have. But, again, ultimately it's the client's decision. I would probably want to thoroughly vet that we disclose as much as possible.
I just want to say quick, it also probably depends on what kind of document that you're ultimately filing. If it's like a CAT-X, you probably maybe don't need to disclose that you're doing co-living. If it's an MMD or like a full EIR, I think that's probably makes sense that you're going to do the full analysis.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I saw Richard raise his hand.
Thank you. To what extent is there any design elements being incorporated now which allows for a fallback position in case the developer wants to change his project to be a multifamily, more conventional size room for a master bedroom maybe, and closet space, that kind of thing?
The question was around convertibility back to traditional units if you're building a co-living building. And then I think Patrick can touch on it, and if anyone else is.
So it really depends, and sometimes we are asked to look at a project that might or one that has the potential of being converted in the future to another product, market rate housing per se, for instance.
Yeah.
For us, it's been largely situational. If you're doing a conversion, let's say you're looking at a late delivery of a building that could be a condo conversion, and you may not want to mess with the floor plate so much because that could be a condo exit later on. Or if you're looking at a traditional AC rehab deal that's built in, I guess, early 2000s, that's strictly apartments, and it would be purpose-built for co-living after that point by us, strictly to not be converted. And then lastly, I guess the second school of thought is just to build purpose-built co-living, not to convert, just lower rents if you needed to in order to survive a cycle or something like that, if that's what the question would be about.
Generally, if you're building a six-bedroom apartment, in many markets, it's a very difficult apartment to rent out to a one family, for example. But if you converted 3 of the bedrooms into one bedroom, you made a giant master. I mean, that would make it at least more attractive for small, regular-sized families.
One thing I would add too is if you are wanting to look 10 years down the line and you do see this as maybe something you want to convert to take a 5 or a 6 bedroom unit and turn it into a 3-bedroom condo, just have somebody analyze what the parking requirement would be for that 3-bedroom condo, because that 3-bedroom condo could very well have a greater parking requirement, because condos require guest parking, apartments don't. And then there's also just certain areas where, because of the specific plan of the community plan, you're required to have additional parking. So maybe you park it so that this could one day be a 3-bedroom condo. If it never gets made to 3-bedroom condos, well, okay, so you got some extra parking, but that's one thing I would add.
Great. Thank you so much for participating on this panel. We appreciate it. We'll be around after, and we'll get the next panel kicked off shortly.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Adapting Co-Living panel. My name is Bridget Fair. I'm the VP of Asset Management at Common. So in the last panel, we heard about developing ground-up co-living. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about adaptive reuse projects, actually taking existing assets, whether they be new or in some cases even stabilized, and adding co-living into them. Just a quick show of hands, how many people are working on adaptive reuse co-living projects? Okay, and how many people are thinking about it? A few. Okay, great. So to explore this topic, we have a great panel of 4 groups that are working on various adaptive co-living projects. Peter, if we can kick off with you, please introduce yourself and explain in what capacity you have worked with Common.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Peter Stewart, Outlier Realty Capital. We're an investment and development shop based in Washington, D.C. We built 24 beds for Common 3 years ago. It was the first Common deal in DC, and that was an adaptive reuse of what was designed as a bed and breakfast. And then since then, we're just about to deliver 46 beds, a converted church. That's been a fun one. And then we've got about another 100 beds under construction in DC and about 500 in the pipeline. In addition to that, we own a portfolio of workforce housing in the Mid-Atlantic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Britt Zafir, and I'm the CEO of KIN, which is a new joint venture partnership that Common launched together with Tishman Speyer earlier this year. And KIN is really focused on providing young family housing, borrowing from a lot of the value proposition of Common, namely affordability through density, convenience, community, and technology. Prior to spearheading the launch of KIN, I actually worked at Common for the last 3 years, closely with Peter, among others, as I was a real estate acquisitions lead for a handful of East Coast markets. And today, KIN is definitely a separate company, but we work closely together with Common as well as with various real estate partners, including some of you in this room, focused on determining highest and best use across a number of assets and sites, be it co-living or young family housing, or in many cases, both. So happy to be here.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Brad Padden, and I have a company called Housing Diversity. I have 389 units, micro apartments and studio apartments. A little different than kind of traditional co-living in that the community spaces are throughout the building as opposed to shared spaces in the actual apartments. All 389 units are managed by Common, and they're all adaptive reuse based in Seattle.
Jonathan Law, VP of Development with Bond Companies. I met Common back in 2016. We did one of their first deals up in Northern California, which was an adaptive reuse. We had converted an old housing authority building into a co-living community. Since then, I've worked on entitling and developing a variety of projects, which were featured either a mix of co-living or were 100% co-living. So I'm pretty familiar with that. Later today, you'll see one of our buildings in Echo Park, which we've brought kind of Common in to manage the co-living units there. So.
Great, thank you. So to kick us off, would love to start with a question for all of you to answer. What is the biggest opportunity that you perceive in adaptive reuse projects?
Sure, I'll go first. So, I mean, at the end of the day, what our company is looking to do is provide housing that people can afford, right? So we're going into neighborhoods where people are getting priced out. We're looking for buildings where, you know, we can go in that they're underutilized. We can go in and add additional density and create, you know, that affordable living condition. So ultimately, that's the way we're looking at it.
Yeah, I think I would add to that and say that, you know, one of the there's two main reasons that I love adaptive reuse. One is, you know, selfishly just speed to market. It's just so much faster than ground up development. But the second is also that I think there's like a real charm and a real special flavor and character that you get from adaptive reuse that often gets lost in ground up construction. And I definitely learned this working with Peter on the church project that he mentioned earlier. I mean, what an amazing opportunity to bring, you know, 46 beds online with such character and history and charm in such an incredible market in DC where, you know, ground up development is really hard to do. And so I think one of the cool things that Common and, you know, now Kin is doing is really saying, how do we take an existing asset and add value? And value can be added in a lot of ways. Density is one and the biggest one. But another, you know, using the Kin example, is thinking about adding value through technology, through programming, through childcare services, through bringing a community of young families together. And I think, you know, what Common has done, first on the co-living side, now with Kin, and certainly in the future with other brands that they, you know, may introduce, is really think about how do we take existing assets and add value. And I think adaptive reuse is one of the most special ways to do that.
Well, I guess first thing with adaptive reuse is I love solving problems. And adaptive reuse, you end up with a ton of problems. One of the most exciting things, though, about adaptive reuse is that most of these locations have been built out for sometimes over 100 years. So the locations were picked by individuals that were savvy real estate investors, you know, a century ago. And so we have an opportunity to pick up these assets and really reimagine them to add density, to add affordability, to add finishes, to put new electric in these buildings and breathe new life into them. And hopefully they'll be there for the next 100 years. And for me, that's the most exciting thing about adaptive reuse.
Yeah, I want to reiterate speed to market. You know, with the way that the environment is today, just getting a project permitted, entitled, and built, the process is longer than probably it has ever been before. Especially in LA, there's a lot of everyone's searching for urban infill opportunities. And if you're able to find a well-located asset that you can densify and kind of convert into a co-living project, that's a really good way to look about it. Of course, you have to make sure you can comply with the parking requirements as you add bedrooms. A lot of what we've been kind of focused on is we have a lot of projects under construction that are already entitled, and looking at those projects and figuring out ways to kind of bring in co-living so we can either convert 100% to co-living or kind of move forward with a hybrid model where maybe we have a couple of floors of co-living and a few floors of traditional multifamily. And how does that change our business plan? How does the architecture and the use of all the amenity space change to accommodate the needs of, of Common and other co-living operators today?
Great, thank you. So kind of digging in, Jonathan, you were one of the first partners to convert a building with a traditional layout to a co-living layout, and that's Common MacArthur up in the Bay Area. What were some of the challenges?
So that project, I think, with any older historic building, it wasn't historic, but any older building, there's always a lot of challenges when you densify, mainly with the building infrastructure. Having to run all new MEPs, we basically had to strip it down to its bones and start from scratch. I think there's a learning curve for us. At that time, I was kind of focused on workforce housing. Common provides workforce housing, but a higher quality experience. I think by kind of renting it out by the bedroom, you give people the opportunity to live better than they could before. So we just had there's a lot of coordination issues in the field, and really kind of aligning the developer's interest with Common, and weighing the pros and cons of whether it be finish upgrades that Common wanted with kind of our original plan, really looking at the OpEx and how the building looked if we managed it versus they managed it. So it was a continual conversation, and I think coming out of that, it was a great experience for us both. And if we were to do it again, it'd be very smooth and seamless. And yeah.
Great, thank you. Peter, moving to you, you've opened one co-living home. You are about to open another, that's Common Richardson and Common Monroe, both in DC, and you've got 3 more in the pipeline. So you've been working with us for a number of years. How has your approach changed over time?
Well, the one example that I give is the kind of finish guidelines that you guys have. I think the first one was like 3 pages, and now it's like 30, right? So you guys have become a lot more sophisticated. In terms of other ways, I mean, obviously, as you do more of these, it becomes easier, right? Your teams understand, how things are going. Right now, we're going through the process of low voltage work at one of our properties, the 46-bed Monroe property. And now that we've seen that movie before, we're kind of anticipating some of the challenges we had there. So certainly, it gets easier as you move along.
Thank you. Britt, you are evaluating opportunities with a slightly different lens. You are looking for projects that would lend themselves to family living. What are you typically looking for, and how can you layer kin on top of a building that's already built?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most fun parts about kin is really that, there are so many existing buildings that already work for kin. I mean, it really is a traditional multifamily product where, we get to, approach a developer or an owner and say, we can take your existing floor plans and juice the NOI and really add that value that I was talking about. The main things that we look for in order to be able to work through adaptive co-living sites is the obvious. I mean, size, scale, location, price points is a big one. We're incredibly focused on being able to drive affordability to families in urban centers. So thinking about price points in submarkets is key to what we do. And then beyond that, it's really about unit mix and unit layouts. And it's actually really fun to get to work with the Common team because what's interesting is not all 2-bedrooms are created equal. Some 2-bedrooms could be great for young families and a great use case for kin. And some, when they're really big, let's say they're north of 950 or 1,000 square feet, they're great for co-living to be able to sort of add in that density. And so, again, I think we really look carefully at unit mix, at layouts, and we're always thinking like, where can we add the most value as a brand?
Thank you. Brad, you have also a slightly different perspective here in that you have focused to date mostly on micro units in Seattle. Curious to hear from you how you think about micro units versus co-living.
Yeah, I think micro units have a lot of advantages in that you really have a one-to-one relationship with the renter. A lot of the kind of friction points, shared bathrooms, shared kitchens, kind of fade to the background when you have micro apartments. All of our units are in suite. All of them have a kitchen or a kitchenette. Micro units range, I mean, it's micro apartments. It's kind of a ranging definition. It can range from a 180 square foot unit to a 400 square foot unit, depending on what city you're in. In LA, tend to be on the larger side. In Seattle, we have apartments as small as 99 square feet. They're really a bedroom, and the community spaces are throughout the buildings. And again, this really is a drive for affordability and access. So in our projects, we're always looking for 90 walk scores, 90 plus transit scores to allow people to live close to where they're working or going to school. But I really enjoy that one-to-one relationship. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of doing the micro apartment co-living style.
Thank you. Another question for everyone. How do you think about risk when you're evaluating adaptive reuse projects?
I can start. Really easy for me since the risk is pretty much nothing since we're really looking at projects that already exist, floor plans that already exist. I love no longer having to answer the convertibility question. And so, everyone, working on KIN is basically like rolling a ball downhill because everyone knows that young families exist. Everyone gets the demographic. Usually I'm pitching to the demographic. And so they really get, this is, there's a need for this type of housing in urban cores. And so it's pretty cool because we get to talk about existing floor plans and added value with, virtually no risk. So I love being able to say that the risk is zero and the return is outsized. It's a good business to be in.
Yeah, I would agree. Any deal we look at and move forward with, it'll pencil as multifamily. So we kind of take the co-living piece as added upside. So I think what's great about our buildings is we build to hold. So we're focused on building a really high quality product that kind of provides a full amenity offering for the future tenants, which kind of goes hand in hand with co-living. Creating smaller, intimate, and large public spaces for community building. We kind of look at it as an investment in reduced turnover and just providing a high quality overall experience for the tenant. Again, we build to hold and we want to keep the asset for a long time. So these are things that we would be doing anyways. So the business plan of Commons and ours kind of naturally are in alignment.
I guess, for risk for me, we do massive renovations to these buildings. We're typically putting, 2 to 3 times the price that we're buying these buildings into the building to create these micro apartment communities. So from a risk standpoint for me, there's a couple of ways that reduces risk. First of all, adaptive reuse tends to fly a bit under the radar of the entitlements process. So we can avoid things like design review and community involvement in these projects. So we're able to get to market faster and with a higher degree of certainty. The other thing about kind of doing the big renovations on our projects is that we're basically doing everything to the building. So there's really we're not going to find a bad foundation because we're putting a new foundation in. We're not going to find bad plumbing because we're putting new plumbing in all the way to the sewer line in the street. So we reduce risk by basically doing everything.
Yeah, I'll echo 2 things that Jonathan said. First is just on the physical side, when you're doing adaptive reuse projects, it's what you find in the building. It's what's in the walls that is often most problematic, and that's a big risk, obviously, that any developer shares. And the second thing I'll echo is just, as long as your project pencils as multifamily, if you're, going the co-living route, you're going to generate a higher, dollar per net square foot rent. So it should be accretive to your pro forma.
Thank you. Jonathan, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but you're evaluating a few opportunities to add co-living to buildings that are already entitled but not yet built. What's that process been like?
So, most of the buildings that we develop, they don't have 6-bedroom units. They don't have 8-bedroom units. We'll have a unit mix of typically studio and 1-bedrooms, then 2 to 4-bedroom units. So for us, we've already gone through planning, we've gone through building. Some of these are actually in the middle of construction now. It's just finding an operating partner who has an aligned vision to potentially manage the whole building for us, and then add value by leasing out by the larger units that are typically harder to lease in the market. I think the big thing for us is it really allows us to offer like a lower price of entry into our buildings and appeal to a much larger market. I think that's something that kind of the development world in the last, half dozen years has kind of neglected. Most product out there is really meant for the high-end customer, and this allows us to offer a very high-quality living experience for somebody who can only afford, $1,000 or $1,500 a month.
Thank you. Brad, another one for you. You've historically worked in Seattle, and you are now starting to evaluate opportunities in Los Angeles. Why, and what are you seeing here?
LA is just super exciting market. It's the population, the massive population that there is here in LA and LA County. The need for more affordable solutions. Again, my new company name, Housing Diversity. I'm looking to create new options in this market. for people that are being priced out of the neighborhoods that want to live close to their work. So LA has some really interesting changes that are going on with land use regulations and TOC type rules that are changing the dynamics of the market, which I think for co-living operators gives a really great opportunity to kind of take advantage of these new regulatory changes. And so for me, Seattle has a very progressive land use code, which makes it really exciting to come in and develop in that market. And looking around the country and finding other markets that are getting progressive or already are progressive. And LA just kind of stuck out as a market that's really maturing now. They're coming to understand the need for affordability and location. I think the city council, we have quite a bit of tailwind here with the city council and the affordable component.
Great, thank you. Britt, you've looked at a number of different types of projects, so build to suit as well as adaptive reuse, layering kin on top of built and vacant buildings and even built and stabilized buildings. What are some of the biggest differences?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say some of the biggest, in built to suit, it's super easy. Like, we get to build this perfect product, and it's like a blue sky model, and it has all the bells and whistles. We get really cool features like stroller parking on every floor, and these like really nice amenity spaces that are tailored to families with young children that kind of mix the desires and the needs of an adult or a parent in an amenity space, combined with ways to keep kids busy for as long as possible, so the adults can have their glass of wine while their kid plays in the one-way glass room next door where the kid can't see them, and the adults can keep an eye out on the child. So all that is awesome. So built to suit is easy. We have gotten a ton of interest on this, and we have a couple of really cool projects in our pipeline that are all built to suit and sort of delivering 2021 and beyond. Adaptive reuse is tougher because it is tougher to find these larger format units. Everyone's building studios and one bedrooms, even micro units in many cases and in many markets. But the great thing about adaptive reuse is obviously, as I sort of mentioned before, the speed to market and the charm. So there's pros and cons in each, and we kind of have a pipeline across a bunch of different cities. That's the last point I'll mention, is that kin is interesting because there are young families that want to live in this like communal environment across a range of cities and across a range of price points, and so we're finding kind of our interested customer base and our interested real estate partner base is really, really varied kind of across the U.S. and also across international markets, with sort of no preconceived notions about which market this does and doesn't work in. Sort of everyone kind of sees the need for kin really all over.
Thank you. Peter, one of the biggest questions that we get is how financeability works with adaptive reuse projects. You've got an existing, maybe more traditional use, multifamily asset. You introduce co-living. What does that do to financeability?
So we haven't had much trouble financing our deals. We get this question a lot. And one of the things that a lot of folks ask is, well, what is co-living, roommate-style housing? How does it work? And a lot of people perceive that there's risk in that asset type. And what we have said is, roommate-style housing is, an old business. It's not a new business. You've rebranded it very successfully. But I think that was one of the barriers for a lot of our financing folks. But once we got them over that hurdle, they really attached onto this is lowercase a affordable product, right? We're 30% typically below a market rate studio or one bedroom in the market, and they like that hedge. They like that kind of cycle resilient strategy, as somebody on the last panel mentioned. And then specific to adaptive reuse, obviously it may be a little bit lower leverage, but we're still today getting 70, 75% of loan to cost, low fives interest rate.
Thank you. I'm curious, Jonathan and or Brad, have you seen the same thing? Have you seen something different financing your projects?
I think long term, it's only a matter of time until co-living is treated as an asset class. I think most of us think that it's going to be treated the same way as student housing. So it's been relatively challenging in the past, and there's been only a small handful of lenders who would do the takeout. But I think as this kind of continues to evolve, it should be business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, for micro apartments, I mean, we've been pretty well legitimatized already. I just did a $20 million takeout financing on an adaptive reuse building, brick unreinforced masonry, beautiful 1911 vintage building on First Hill in Seattle. Freddie Mac did the loan, 10-year fixed, 3 years interest only. It was a perfect takeout loan for that project. Got non-recourse debt on it. So I think, you know, the more that we have this conversation about affordability and the need for these alternative solutions, the more the lending community is going to see this as legitimate asset classes and step up and provide the financing. And in fact, I think there's some mandates from the federal government to the agency lenders telling them to look at alternatives and say that, you know, we haven't been able to solve the crisis for affordability in other ways. And so if we can get the agency lenders to really realize that co-living, micro apartments is a legitimate form of small A affordable housing or attainable housing, I think that there'll be, the floodgates will open for lenders.
And HUD actually published an article maybe 6 months ago specifically about how co-living is lowercase a affordable housing.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, one more for you. You have an asset, Common Belmont, where you've actually introduced co-living to the building over time as it's stabilized. What has that process been like?
You know, I think it's gone pretty smoothly. So this is the building that all you guys are welcome to kind of tour later. So we had a mix of kind of 1-bedroom studios and 3-bedroom units. And Common came on board to manage all the 3-bedroom units. We're also exploring some kind of densification options there as well. I think the biggest challenge is how does that interplay with the existing residents? You know, Common typically will have events for its members and other things like that. So that's something that we kind of need to think about and solve going forward, especially just for us as a company. You know, our pipeline consists of a lot of projects that are these hybrids, you know, 20% co-living, 80% multifamily, and that's going to be a question that, you know, we want to try to answer pretty soon. You don't want people coming home and then feeling excluded from an event, but at the same time, you know, they need to contribute to the fund for these events. It's almost like an added membership fee. I guess that could be one possible solution, is people could opt in to kind of the social aspect within the building. Yeah.
Thanks. We'll wrap up pretty soon here. Would love to hear from each of you what makes for a great adaptive reuse projects. What are the key ingredients that you're looking for that make an asset ripe for co-living introduction?
A good basis, but that's, you know, that's generally so good basis. No, so one thing specific to co-living that we've found is, you know, when you think about density, you think about bedrooms, you need to be looking for light and air, and so. You know, mid-block sometimes is hard unless you've got alley access, but we found that end caps or, you know, corners are great for co-living specifically.
One of the toughest parts about adaptive that's super important to get right, I think, is community space and having some space for people to get together. I think that's a huge part of what we're doing, both at Kin and Common at Co-Living. It's really bringing people together. Cities are such lonely places, and I think people who are opting into this type of living environment are really looking to meet their neighbors and their roommates. And so I think having some access, even if it's for community space and community programming, even if it's just a rooftop or you know, some space that you can carve out is incredibly important. And I know at Kin we're pretty much that sort of something that for us is really important because, you know, young families live in cities. It's really tough. It's really unaffordable. But really the hardest part is finding other young families to do it with and having that space for things like nanny sharing and birthday parties and, you know, what to do on a rainy day. And so having that community space built in is a differentiator that I think we can all provide in adaptive reuse projects.
Yeah, so, again, our buildings really are kind of a blank canvas because we do such a big renovation to them. So we're able to incorporate a lot of community spaces and, get an ideal layout based on the windows in the building. So I think for us, really, the most important characteristics are our walk score and transit score. Just picking that building that is at the ultimate, 50-yard line seat, and then inviting the people from the top of the bleachers down to live in that 50-yard line seat. I mean, for me, that's what gives me kind of the goosebumps, like I just got now.
I think just looking back, the biggest challenges have always been the same. It's been open space, the community space, and the densification part is pretty easy, but finding actual tangible spaces within a building where we can provide the experience that we want co-living members to have is always the hardest part. And then obviously the parking as well, especially in LA where we're so car dependent. These are things that we have to take into account, kind of underwriting and developing going forward, just to make sure, we don't have a building where no one will lease because they don't have enough, they can't put the car there, or they don't get that sense of community that they're kind of have already bought into after going through the common kind of interview process.
Thank you. Last one before we open it up for questions. Why adaptive reuse? Why are you choosing to do these types of projects instead of ground up? What have you learned, and will you continue to do them?
I think Brad said it earlier, which is we like solving problems, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to be frustrated at, finding a baptismal pool in your basement that you didn't know you had? I mean, it's great. That was from the church renovation that we're doing right now. So I do think there's some aspect of, taking something old and kind of breathing new life into it. It's a special opportunity.
I love taking a $150,000 rent roll and turning it into a $900,000 rent roll in the same building. I mean, and that really is the fundamental for me. The excitement of it is looking at an asset and seeing it in a totally different light than anybody has ever seen it in. We're competing against folks on these projects that are going to do granite countertops and new cabinets, and we just look at the real estate asset from a fundamentally different perspective. I mean, we just destroy the old model, and that gives us an opportunity to buy in hot markets like Seattle, like LA, and compete with folks that we probably shouldn't be competing with because we're so new to the market, but we can because we're just we're blowing up the financial model.
I think for us, it's all about supply and demand. There's a lot more existing multifamily buildings that could use a little love, or other buildings that could be repositioned for multifamily and co-living than there are, greenfield sites that we can build the next high-rise on. So it's just about opportunity and finding the right partner to move forward with.
Yeah, I think for us, certainly we love adaptive reuse. We also love ground-up development, and I think it's really important to balance both in our pipelines. The fun part about adaptive reuse is getting to be creative and getting to work with people who believe in our model, off the bat. Right now we have one existing site in Long Island City. It's our proof of concept, but we're working on kind of like 3 more that we're getting ready to announce in the next 6 months that are kind of under construction, and hopefully will be kind of online by Q2 of next year. And that's really fun. It takes someone really creative and really innovative and visionary to hear what I'm doing, look at our one proof of concept and say, like, I get this and I want to build this. And so for me, it's getting to work with people who are creative and visionary and then getting to see the results so soon, which is really exciting about adaptive reuse.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We'd like to open it up for questions now. Any questions for this group? Yes, in the back.
How do you guys balance the lifts you can get, the rents, versus the cost, and make that accretive still? Have you guys had to wrestle with that yet?
So I'll repeat the question is about rent control and how folks on the panel have navigated that.
I haven't done an adaptive reuse in LA yet, but one thing I know from having looked at some adaptive reuses is getting vacant buildings So we avoid the problem by getting vacant buildings. That's why LA has so many of these vacant buildings just sitting there. Unfortunately, the owners think that they're worth a 3 cap or a 2 cap or a 1 cap. But if they didn't, we could redevelop those and add a lot of housing. Also, commercial adaptive reuse in LA is another area, but they all avoid your question, which is if you have an existing asset and you're already renting it to renters and you've established a track record and it's older than 15 years or whatever the new rules are, yeah, I can't answer that, but I know we try to avoid it by looking at buildings that we don't have that problem.
We have a vacant building for sale.
At a 3 cap? 3 cap?
Yes, in the front.
I wonder, are there any unique challenges of taking over like a condo development and making it co-living?
The question was about repositioning condo developments that have maybe stalled, that aren't selling. Is there an opportunity there to adapt those to a rental use?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity for both co-living and kin. Kin, I know 2 of the 3 sort of sites that I mentioned are both condo developments that are, the owners are thinking about holding on to it as a rental property instead of sort of selling out now at, prices that they, may not be getting the returns they were looking for when they originally built. Really good opportunity. The main challenge here is always around termination rates and length of time. Owners want to keep the flexibility in terms of, testing the market. And, we feel strongly that we're really investing in an asset and our brand there and sort of want to be at the asset, in the asset for a longer period of time. But this hasn't been, something that we can't overcome, but it tends to be sort of one of the bigger points of discussion.
And do you try to position that where it could later be maybe sold as a condo later, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important for us to stay flexible to the owner's needs and thinking about the market, but in a way that also makes sense for us as the operators, given that, on the co-living side, we'll be coming in many cases, working with the owner to furnish the unit, spending a lot of time and, adding value to the asset. On the kin side, we're really thinking about the community and amenity spaces in a family-oriented way, and then really investing in leasing up the building and the brand. And so one of the coolest things that we're starting to explore is thinking about how our multifamily tenants might eventually become the buyers of the condos, particularly for the kin use. So that's something new that we're just working on now in actually not in East Harlem, but not too far from there in West Harlem.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much to all of our great panelists on adapting co-living. Thank you.
I'm violating one of my own rules here today. I've learned in the course of my career, you never want to be the last panel or discussion group at the end of the day. The good news, and that mitigates it somewhat, is we do not have an open bar in the next room. I know that when you set that up, it's virtually impossible to hold on to anyone. But anyway, thank you all very much for being here for the last panel today. We're going to be discussing the financing of co-living. I'm very happy to have such distinguished guests and members of my panel. I'm going to ask that you each introduce yourself, but very briefly, half a minute or less. Then I have some questions prepared, and then we're gonna open it up for questions from the floor. So why don't we start with Zach?
Great, thanks Simon, and thanks to Common for hosting this awesome event, and really honored to be here. My name is Zach Streit. I'm a senior vice president at George Smith Partners. We're a debt and equity finance advisory shop based in LA in Century City. Our focus is really helping entrepreneurial sponsors get their both large institutional deals and also sub-institutional deals capitalized. So we work on stuff, as small as $5 or $10 million. And earlier this year, we closed a $460 million loan, which we're really proud of. Because most of our sponsors are entrepreneurs, we tend to focus in spaces where entrepreneurs can find yield. That's largely multifamily and hospitality. And within multifamily, there have been a lot of co-living requests as of late. So it's something that we're excited about and focus on.
Thank you.
Great. Adam Dosky. I'm with CBRE's newly formed co-living finance group. If you guys don't know, CBRE is the largest Freddie Mac lender in the country for 10 years by an order of magnitude. We are also the largest, as of last year, largest multifamily lender in the country, period. And we have made tremendous strides over the last 12 months in engaging Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to pursue this new emerging asset class on the debt side with permanent debt. And so we've got some exciting news to share with you. After this, after we all go home tomorrow or tonight, we'll be releasing a 5 or 6 page debt overview and guideline report that should be coming to you guys on Wednesday or so. But we're very excited about this. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dan Pianideb with GP Realty Finance. We're a small boutique commercial mortgage banking firm up in Seattle, Washington. A little bit of a different niche. I've been financing for the past 11 years microhousing, financed about 8,000 units of microhousing. In full disclosure, about 0 units of co-living. I signed up for this conference to come down here and find out what co-living actually is. So just want to
put you right on the panel.
I just want to lay that out right there. I'm not an expert. Yeah, so, but really, I'm excited to kind of see and understand the differences between co-living and microhousing. And we started, from our perspective in Seattle, which where we're based, microhousing kind of started in 2009 at the kind of the depths of the recession, and it's changed a lot over the past 11 years. And so, for me, I think the thing I'm really excited about is the tour afterwards to go see a co-living project, which would be my first. So, thanks.
Good afternoon. My name's Wayne Brandt. Thanks, Simon, for having me on the panel. It's great to be here. Thank you. It's great to be with all of you, and I really enjoyed all the panel discussions earlier this morning. I think, actually, my wife and I are going to sell our house in the suburbs and move into a co-living facility. I just don't know what to do about the patio furniture. We'll figure that out. But it's great to be here. It's a wonderful concept to be engaged with this audience. Again, I'm Wayne Brandt. I run originations for our commercial mortgage-backed securities group. We have a pretty active balance sheet. We originate about $10 billion a year. I've been at Wells Fargo for 10 years now. We started the business right after the Great Recession, rejuvenated it back, kind of one loan at a time, one banker at a time. And now we do about 400 loans a year, about $10 billion, probably $3 billion in balance sheet and $7 billion in CMBS. So it's a very, very active book. And this space is growing in our awareness around the bank is something that's very, very important to us, and look forward to discussion this morning or this afternoon, Simon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. So before we talk about some of the specific issues relevant to financing co-living, I wanted to see if we couldn't take 5 minutes and talk a little bit about setting the stage a little bit about where we are and where lenders think of themselves in terms of the cycle. The economic cycle, the lending cycle. We all know that we're in the 8th or 9th inning of an expansion. The question, we don't know whether the game is going to go 14, 15, or 16 innings. We also know that we're now in an ultra low interest rate environment. We thought that it was going to be going the other way earlier this year. And then lo and behold, now we find ourselves with rates that are continuing to drop and will probably continue to drop going forward. And so I just want to see how people feel about, multifamily lending in general. What are the additional pressures or concerns that a bank or other lender might be trying to address at this point in time? Wayne, you want to maybe kick us off?
Sure, I'll kick it off. So I think it's a great question, and it's on everybody's mind. So what's obvious? What's obvious is that we're slowing right now. The growth curve is beginning to flatten a little bit. What's not obvious is when and if we'll dip into a recession. So I don't really have any original thoughts about the economy myself, but I do know, our economists are pretty good, and so here's what they're projecting. Okay, so for 2020, they're projecting not a recession. 21, not a recession, just a slowing. So GDP is going to fall from where it is today. The last 2 quarters of 2019 will probably average out about 1.5%. Next year, we'll be at 1.7%. The year after that, it'll be 2.2%. That's not a recession. They're very clear about that. Yes, there's huge headwinds. We've got a trade war. We've got slowing GDP in China from 6.6 to 6.2%. Germany's on the brink of recession right now. And obviously, manufacturing is being hurt by the tariffs and the trade war. So those are the negatives, but to the positive, we have very strong employment, and they don't see unemployment really, moving much above 3.6 for the next 2 to 3 years. So these are all very positive trends, and I think bode very well for real estate. Particularly, our economists are all projecting a drop in. There's going to be another cut on October 25th. They're projecting the 10-year Treasury this year, next year, 175, and the year after that to only rise to 2.21%. So that creates a lot of positive leverage in our space. Then you go to multifamily, which I love in Los Angeles. Let's just go to this community, which many of you are engaged in. Our population is at 10 million people. We added 63,000 new jobs year over year last year, just in LA County. So this is what's causing the affordability squeeze, which I don't need to go into all the data that others have covered in the panel, but you all know what it is. And that's why this discussion is so relevant today, and why our vacancy rate across LA County for the last 6 years has not really gone much above 4%, even with all the deliveries. So it seems like we've absorbed what we've delivered. I think that's very healthy and set up nicely for something that I think we can do here in the co-living space. So that's my macro, a little bit of micro, but what do others think?
Thank you. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I'll chime in on it a little bit quickly. I thought at the end of last year that interest rate hikes were going to be the straw that would break the camel's back, and obviously we moved in another direction. I still think you have a capital market that's kind of awash in liquidity. We went out recently for was it a $17 million ground up loan request on a co-living facility here in Hollywood. The sponsors in the audience, some of you will know them. And we had probably 4 proposals on that deal, 2 of which were pretty serious, and 1 got put into application. Now that's tough because it's a newer asset class. There's still a lot of resistance to it, but we were super pleased with that response. And we think that's kind of against the broader backdrop of, hey, there's a lot of money out there in the system, and for the right deals, it wants to find a home. There's tremendous competition, maybe more so than any other spot in the capital market, in the bridge debt space right now. You have a transitional asset with some or even no cash flow, and you're looking for non-recourse financing, let's say on a loan amount of $10 million and up, there is more pressure, more supply of debt funds out there that want to do your deal than we've ever seen. We've put some deals in applications that have had spreads, that were south of 300 over 1 month LIBOR for $10 and $15 million deals, which a year ago you wouldn't have seen that. You would have seen 350, you would have seen 400 over. On the permanent financing side, we just got a term sheet of CMBS. It wasn't on multi, it was on a retail deal from Wayne's Group that was 10-year interest only for 3.5%.
I didn't approve that. That's not
He didn't approve it. He didn't like it. So, while there is definitely some questions, you've got a tariff war potentially that's happening there. You probably don't have interest rate risk on the table anymore. There's political uncertainty. You also have so much that's positive. You have a capital market awash in liquidity. You're going into an election year, so typically we know what that looks like. And then you have a broader backdrop in LA of so much infrastructure investing, whether it's a multi-billion-dollar expansion at LAX, new stadiums that are coming in. It seems like a new big tech lease that's signed every single day. So I would say on a micro level here, I think still a lot of optimism, at least 1 or 2 years out. But there is no question, right? You're probably 10 years into a recovery. Nothing goes on forever, so you have to think about at least moderating growth, if nothing else.
So to break it down and get a little more granular, rather than, we all know the availability of multifamily debt capital is strong. There's an ample amount of, regardless of what rates do, whether they go up or down or sideways in the next couple of years, there's a ton of capital out there. Why are we asking what is the economy going to do looking forward? We're asking because we have got a number of developers in this room who are considering going ground up with this emerging asset class and are you going to get stuck holding a bag in a correcting economy, a 2010 or 11 event. And so all we can look at, in my perspective, is I've done workforce housing finance for my entire career. And you look back to the last big correction, happened to be an awful one. But what we saw in a lot of apartment buildings, Class C, B, the same type of tenants as we would see in these product and co-living, is we saw when things got really bad and job losses started mounting, folks tended to double up. And they would go and get out of their 1-bed or studio and go into a 2-bed or a 3-bed with their buddies. And if that got too tough, go and get a couple more folks in there, right? I bring this up because as a hedge against any real unforeseen shock, I think co-living is a fantastic hedge.
So I'm going to bring a little different perspective here. This is probably not going to be as positive. So 2/3 of my time is spent originating debt. The other third is spent investing in projects, and a lot of that's been microhousing with my clients/partners. The thing that keeps me up at night is, okay, let's say rents sort of are starting to stabilize at our sector. The thing that's been going through the roof for us has been costs and construction costs. And I don't know about any of you, but over the past, call it 3 years, I've had to fund a cash call 3 times. It's not a fun experience, and it's something that I think, when we're doing our performance right now, maybe it shows a 7% return on cost. But if you're not breaking ground for 2 more years, and if you think rents are going to flatline and costs escalate 10% per year, that return on cost changes really quickly. So I think from my perspective, right now, we're seeing, at least in Seattle, rents kind of flatlining, but we're seeing major cost, not only cost increases, but cost overruns in projects. So.
Great, thank you for that. Let's now turn and talk a little bit specifically about co-living and financing co-living. And I want to ask each of you to imagine you're on, well, some of you are, but you're on the credit committee of the bank or financial provider, and one of your business development or origination bankers comes in with a transaction and it's co-living. What is that conversation like? What are the issues that you raise? What are the pressure points for you as a credit officer when you think about how to finance one of these newer type projects? Should we start again with Wayne?
Sure. So I had the
straw in that straw.
Yeah, it's not to be the Debbie Downer, okay. But I did go into my chief credit officer's office a couple of days ago and say, hey, I'm on this panel. What do you think? Was not a good conversation, okay. So, but I kind of worked through it, and I talked to others around the bank, and I think you can draw some analogies to WeWork. And it's not like there's a moratorium on the co-working space, but there's more credit experience around that. And what does it mean for larger portfolios? And here's the bottom line. It does work. Co-living does work. We can lend on it. We as money center banks, we're not seeing a lot of it because the industry is so new. Yeah. But what you have to do is take a page from the agencies. The deals that are getting done with Freddie and Fannie are kind of maxing out total 20 to 25% units, right, guys, brokers? I mean, is that kind of right around there?
More or less, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. And the WeWork kind of, the threshold for most commercial banks was at about 20, 25%. Once you get above those thresholds, and now I'm going to extrapolate into the CMBS market as well, then it gets to be a tougher underwriting. So I think as you go into your pro forma, if you want to be conservative, I think you can get 20% done. And then what is the lender? What's the credit guy really going to look at? What's a BP Spire? How are they going to adjust the cash flow? What's a rating agency going to do? I'll tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're going to take your market rents, if we're just back to normal multifamily, and try to make the deal work there. So your leverage is dropping, your debt yield is going to be higher, and there may be recourse. And so the deals that I'm seeing getting done are being done by some of the foreign banks, local banks, and that's how they're getting done. Maybe some of the debt funds, as Zach rightly mentioned, but the big money center banks, we're all in this space. We as a bank, this is an advertisement, but we will make through other parts of the bank equity investments in real estate technology companies. So we're not afraid of this space, but to make a capital market in it, it's going to take a little bit of time for it to become efficient. So just be careful on your pro forma. don't overdo it. Just, don't think that you're going to be able to, get as much financing as you think. It is financeable, though, and we have to, as I said, walk before we run. I can get a lot more technical on the underwriting a little bit later, but those are some big, guidance. But guys, push back on me if you think my market's off, because we're all figuring this out right now.
No, let me tackle it more from a construction loan perspective, because we're looking at a couple of these and we're doing one now. And it's some of the same conversation, and it's also a different conversation. So backing up, I think the most important things when it comes to financing a co-living construction project isn't going to sound too different from what it takes to finance a traditional multifamily project. It's got to be a good sponsor who's got a good balance sheet behind him. Location is going to be paramount, because any lender who does this deal is going to want to make sure that you're not doing it in the sticks, but you're doing it in a place that would encourage community, that is going to attract the type of customer and tenant that wants to live there, and generally with a rich amenity base around it. So you're talking about sponsorship, location, you're talking about good real estate. Beyond that, they're going to want to parse the business plan. Who's the operator? That matters a lot. Everybody is going to ask. And if they're going to take a little risk in the space, they want to do it with a household name. They don't want to just do it with anybody. So when we marketed a deal in Hollywood that we're working on, it's pretty big. It's a 42-unit, 141-bed deal. It's purpose-built co-living. Interestingly enough, it's the first multifamily development deal I've worked on that doesn't have 1 and 2 bedrooms in it. So fancy that. But that makes sense for a co-living strategy. We spent a lot of time with lenders educating them on all of those things, on who the operator would be, on why we think this price per bed comps. And then critically, you need to think about appraisal mitigation, because these are the conversations that the loan originators inside banks or debt funds are going to be having with their credit. And so we spent a lot of time talking about, okay, can you accept price per bed? Because if you try to underwrite this thing as traditional multi, it's not going to work. Can you accept an exit cap rate that might have a slight premium on it? So maybe you're not 4.5, maybe you're 5, but you're not, ballooning it out to 6. So it's those kinds of conversations that happen. And look, we went out to, almost 60 lenders on this deal. Some were straight passes, and they just said, look, we love the space. We think this idea makes a ton of sense. I mean, how could it not? You've got 3,000 beds currently nationally, and maybe 20,000 that are planned, but you have 100 million renters. So it's going to work and it's going to grow. We're not there yet. The key for us, though, is that we found 4 or 5 that are like, you know what? We like this credit. We're willing to dip our toes in this water in this location for this sponsorship group with what you're planning on. We think we can make that work. And then ultimately we were able to sign a term sheet with one of them, and we hope that it closes next month. But definitely a really heavy focus on the business plan, but no different than what you're going to see in a traditional multifamily underwrite, where people want to understand your rents. They want to understand your location. They want to understand who the sponsors are. So I think these deals can get done. No question you're in early innings for the space. But I think for what we've seen, given where we are, definitely positive.
So I was one of the first, I closed the first, or one of the first Fannie Mae loan transactions for a common co-living building. That was about 11 months ago. And since then, I've spent a lot of time touring Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's underwriting C-suite through 5 projects, getting their hands around the project. And, I'll tell you guys a quick story. I had Fannie Mae over at the last conference touring the Marcy Common building in Williamsburg. And they left, they fired questions off, 2 hours of questions. Why should we be in this space? Who is Common? Are you a technology firm or are you a real estate firm? We had to have all those answers, squared away. And we're leaving, and he says to me, he turns to me and he says, gosh, my analysts in New York City can't even afford an apartment building. They would live in something like this, right? And so what I'm trying to say is getting to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's duty to serve, especially under today's political environment where the FHFA is under tremendous pressure, to not overextend ourselves, not do really crazy deals, but the duty to serve and the affordability, and this feeds right into it. And we, CBRE, through our heavy lifting, has gotten a lot of great feedback, and we have now gelled around a set of guidelines moving forward for how to underwrite co-living on a permanent basis for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And I'd be happy to share with you guys what that looks like.
So just a question, do they any focus on conversion back to just multifamily market, or they don't care about that?
Yeah, they do care, of course. What we're hearing is, and it echoes what we've heard here before for other reasons, the land use segment, really max 4 to 5 bedrooms per unit and below is really where the agencies are comfortable. Once you get to 8 or 10 bedrooms, the financeability, as you can attest to, Zach, goes way downhill. It becomes a whole different product.
And I'll tell you, on the construction side, I actually asked that question, and I said, hey, are you guys going to just look at this as traditional multi and take, total hatchet job to it? Because if you are, it's got to be a non-starter conversation-wise, because we're never going to get to proceeds. I didn't get the clearest of answers, but my sense was no. My sense was the way the construction lenders was looking at it was, okay, we're going to look at the price per bed here, and let's say it's, I don't know, rent per bed $1,500 or $1,600. Does this thing still work at $1,400 or $1,300? So the downside seemed to be more of, well, okay, we might have to lease these things at a rental rate that we didn't think we were going to achieve, but not at traditional multi, because it would be hard. I mean, you have 4 and 5 bedroom units in these things, and if anything, the trend in traditional multifamilies, you would never see that. I mean, you'd probably see all studios and 1s, maybe some 2s today in a sort of core urban environment. So I thought that was a very interesting point, that they weren't looking at it that way.
CBRE has, our valuation firm, our appraisal firm, has now done a few co-living ground-up requests and also some takeouts of co-living. They were remarkably able to find enough co-living rent comps to justify those achieved rent levels. So I believe we've just hit that point where now we have just enough data to be able to underwrite those existing rents, which is powerful.
I guess one thing that comes up that we constantly have to address, and we've been working on this for the past decade, is one word, and that's parking. Over and over again, when we're looking at a new site, especially in a market where people think, okay, the customer has to have the car. It's essential you have a car, whether it's LA, San Diego, Portland, Oakland. And so a big part of our time is trying to convince basically the construction lender that, listen, there is a market for this, and it's about a price point. And I think what I would say to you as you're preparing to take this package out to market, it's important to understand not just what the developer saves in terms of of producing buildings without parking, but what the customer spends. At the end of the day, if the customer doesn't actually own a car, and many of these residents don't, at least in the micro-housing communities we finance, you're cutting out the cost of not only owning a car insurance, and you're actually, and another thing too, is you're walking in terms of most of your day-to-day needs. So like one of the big things we always look for is walk score, walkscore.com. That's like the first thing is it a 90 walk score, 95 walk score? That's a really important factor, because I think one of the biggest prejudices that we've had to overcome, at least in the financing of microhousing, has been the fact that many of these communities have little, or in most cases, no parking whatsoever. And part of the reason why Seattle was kind of the first, right now in Seattle we have 10,000 plus units of microhousing, and typically, the average square footage could be anywhere from 200 to 250. Part of the reason that we have such a huge inventory is we were one of the first cities on the West Coast to do away with parking requirements in urban villages. Portland was soon to follow, and then now it's kind of moved on down south through California, in downtown LA, certain parts of San Diego. So I think, I guess when you're looking at taking your deal out to market, be prepared to answer the question about, if this community has no parking, is there going to be demand for it? So.
Simon, just want to comment. It's a good comment on parking, but just going back to the underwriting, I think it is so important what you're saying about the agencies. This is how we make a permanent financing market. We create it through the agencies. There's Freddie and Fannie.
Thank you.
The money center banks will follow, CMBS will follow, but they're going to follow the lead of the agencies. And so if they're comfortable not doing a full conversion analysis, what I call the burn down, like in a typical credit committee analysis, because we have no comps on how to value this, which was raised by one of the other panels, what is the cap rate? So when we stress the refi, as a large money center bank, we're no different than B of A or Morgan Stanley, anybody else, that's how do we get repaid if it's a balance sheet loan? And then the CMBS guys, the BP spires, are going to say, how's this loan going to finance out? And if we can create liquidity in the agency market, like we have clearly, obviously in the multifamily market, then that's going to make everybody feel very, very comfortable. So we need a few of these trades, these financings to go through as kind of the lead blocker for the other, more maybe timid, sources of capital. But sometimes when we're looking at tougher multifamily deals and we're struggling, we'll reach out to our multifamily guys and say, well, where would Freddie or Fannie be on this as a DUS lender? And so they take it all day long. Okay, good. So we know we have liquidity. So that's kind of the step we have to go through. So.
Anyone else? No. Okay. So just one more question, and then I'm going to ask for questions from the audience. So how should developers think about putting together the packages that they need, requests for financing? What should they make sure is involved? Is there a different way they should be thinking about this when they're going out and trying to solicit term sheets from lenders? Yeah. What's the information that you need that you might not have needed if you were just doing, another traditional multifamily?
Oh, you're looking at me.
I'm looking at anyone. I'm looking at all four of you. Anyone.
I'll take
your business, right?
That's our business. I'll take the first stab since we did it. I think it's a lot of the things that I mentioned before. I think it's also sensitizing the pro forma, figuring out, what price per bed you think you can get, making sure that comps, because there are lease comps today. You also have to look at the expense side of your equation and make sure that you are factoring in there kind of the different expense line items that you might not see on a traditional multifamily pro forma. So the trend that we're seeing, and I think amongst most common managed properties, which is great, is that you're essentially getting one check from your co-living tenant, and that's covering their rent plus everything. So you have to make sure if on the expense side, you as a developer are paying for Wi-Fi, you are paying for utilities, you are paying for the cleaning services, et cetera, you're going to have probably larger, expenses, and you need to make sure that those are factored in. And I think lenders have already gotten smarter to the fact that you may see a higher expense load. And if you looked at it on a per unit basis, it could look absurd. It could be $15,000 per unit or more. But if you start looking at it at a per bedroom basis, you might see expenses that are, $6,000 or so per bedroom. So that makes it, look more normal and more reasonable. But for sure, you need to sensitize your rents. You need to think about your expenses. And, you can't use a 2.5 cap, right? If prevailing multi isn't trading at a 2.5 cap. So prevailing multi in your area is, a 4, 4.5. You probably don't want to go more aggressive than that. And maybe you want to put a little bit of cushion outside of it. But when we see these requests, usually we see them coming in at, returns on costs that are 200 to 300 bips, in excess of where you would see kind of a stabilized exit cap be today. But you definitely want to make sure that the lease comps are there and that the pro forma, both on the revenue and expense side, looks right.
But before you go out, so on the lease comps, let me just ask you this. If you're the first project in a particular area, how do you establish the appropriate lease comps on a per bed basis?
Yeah. So it's a great question. Luckily enough, around LA, there's enough of these projects, smaller, some getting to be larger, that are out there. You could establish it. The other way to do it, and the affordability argument that I think we made on this deal is we said, look, if I can rent a bedroom here that's en suite for, $1,600 or $1,700, if you look around at what studios are leasing for, and if they're $2,500 to $3,000, sometimes more in newer buildings, if you could believe that, there's a real affordability argument that you're making here, because you are offering a premium product in a new building, with everything you could want. Utilities included, Wi-Fi is there, cleaning for the common areas, professionally managed, hopefully by Common. There's a real sort of intuitive argument. And even the lenders that we went out to that passed on our deal, they seem to understand that. They seem to know that within this product, you're offering housing in a manner to folks that couldn't otherwise get it there. So, look, if you have no comps, I think that's one argument you make. The other thing you can do is you can look to other markets that already have this product. So, if you're a first mover, in San Diego or a smaller market or wherever it is, you can look to LA. Maybe you could look to Portland or Seattle that, have some of the stuff that's out there now or that it's coming. And I would be doing it that way.
I think the other thing you can do, I mean, I just say this too, not just from the debt side, but the equity side. And when I'm investing in a project, if there's no direct competition, like you don't have direct co-living comps or direct micro comps, what I like to do is just go on Craigslist, set a maximum rent for what you can get. Like, what can I get for under $2,000 in downtown Oakland? And see how many dots pop up. I mean, what does that price point get you? I think that's one of the big things that you want to answer if you're the first to market in an area. Because I want to figure out, okay, is my price point comparable with Class C apartments, for example? Is my price point comparable to SROs? And a lot of times what I like to see is almost a couple different rent comp surveys where you have maybe SRO rent comps, older SROs. Well, you know, that's kind of your lowest price point. Then you have maybe Class B apartments, you know, older apartment buildings near your site. And then finally your Class A sector. So you can kind of try to make sure that you're maybe above the SROs, but below, you know, some of the older apartment buildings. So you're still delivering affordability to the market. So it's up to you to kind of help prove that point. The other thing I think is always good to do is just walk the comps. I mean, shop it. You know, don't dress up in suit and tie. Dress up like you just got off BART and you're ready to go rent a unit. And I mean, I think it's the best way to get an idea of what you can get for your money. So.
Yeah, so I think underwriting, or if you're submitting to a lender, you know, you always start with 100% loan to value, right, guys? And then start negotiating. Probably not the best idea in this space. I think just be realistic, you know, because nothing's really going to comp out easily. And it's okay to be a little bit more conservative. I would go in with, hey, this is what I really need. This is, you know, kind of proceeds, structure to make my deal work, and see if you can get the lender to work with you there. So, you know, again, my approach would be, this is, again, talking more, not about construction, but more permanent or bridge financing. So, you know, look at it in terms of, you know, not 100%, you know, co-living, but a percentage, and then working my vacancy or something to adjust that component of the rent roll a little more conservatively. The rest of it, if it's a mixed rent roll, then that's going to underwrite just fine as multifamily. You know, Zach already mentioned the expenses. Take them up a little more conservatively because they're going to run a little higher, particularly the CapEx. It just has to. And if you're trying to sell the lender on something that, you know, we don't have years of experience on, just try to be realistic. You'll build more credibility. And then most importantly, really sell the quality of the operator. Who is behind this? Why are they so good? What has been their experience? And you know, outside the space, what they bring to it, and how you know, how well capitalized they are. So these are kind of still the same rules of lending 101 and how you interact with your lender. But in this case, you're going after a specialty. Let's call it what it is. It's specialty real estate. It might be. It's the same way a lender's going to, when they first see a data center deal, the way they're going to see a student housing deal. You know, certain, you know, hotel deals, it's going to be skeptical. So build your credibility with, you know, really good information and a lot of data, and pad it a little bit to the conservative, because I think in the long run, they're going to get there and they're going to underwrite it. They're going to hammer it with their own, you know, adjustments. But if you kind of give them the, you know, the path to get to kind of the best deal that you'd find acceptable, you probably will be able to find a way to get there.
Adam, you want to finish this off?
Yeah, thank you. And so at CBRE, we've been thinking a lot about how we can, and working with a lot of you folks in the audience on specific projects as you're penciling them at the outset. Does this deal with co-living pencil, partial co-living, 100% co-living? Whether or not you engage, you know, CBRE or George Smith Partners or whomever to go clear the market for you, which is recommended at this stage in this product type, whether or not you do that, you 100% come to us, approach CBRE or your agency lender, and get a pre-underwritten permanent takeout term sheet. It's not going to be binding, but it's going to show and give confidence to the construction lender that the takeout is there. This is not just hopes and dreams that Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac will come in and save the day. We have underwritten it. And, you know, coming from CBRE, you know, we're the largest Freddie Mac lender by an order of magnitude for 10 years, this piece of paper means something, and it can help get you from not financeable on the construction side to financeable. And that's the service we offer for all you guys. Whether or not you engage us to clear the market for construction debt, we'd love to help pre-underwrite the takeout, okay?
Great, thank you. In the last few minutes that we have, I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. So I'm opening it up for questions from the floor. Anyone? Yes, Richard.
How much of your loan is going to be dependent upon your approach to the bank, presentation, and how much on the appraisal?
We're in a regulated environment. It's not getting any easier. So the whole appraisal process, as you know, is a bit of a struggle. And I think this is where the brokers can be so helpful. I think the more, experience we have with the agencies and where they're appraising out is going to help, because, most appraisers are going to look, just to comp it out, and there's no comps, then, that's 50 basis points on your cap rate. So pay attention. That's why, the economics, I've looked at the economics to the equity on this space is fantastic, but don't get faked out by your pro forma, because ultimately there's going to be an appraisal. Others, they're going to give you a report card on whether they like, taking risks in this space or not. And so the appraisal is a pretty key aspect of it. And I would dial back your expectations that you're going to get close to what you're going to get on a normal multifamily, appraisal.
We actually closed as a firm a smaller co-living deal just east of downtown. CBRE did the appraisal, and it appraised. It was a ground-up construction deal, so it wasn't ready for a permanent loan. And on that deal, the appraiser used a 5 cap on the exit, which is why I was saying before that's probably a good number for LA. But maybe more critically than that, I was pretty worried that the appraiser was just going to take a hatchet job to it and say, oh, I'm underwriting this as traditional multi. I'm throwing out your rent per beds, goodbye and good night. That didn't happen. They actually accepted very close to what the sponsor's pro forma was on a price per bed basis. They got there using a mix of lease comps, believe it or not, from SROs, and then adjusting for newer product and nicer product, and then also using, I think, some co-living lease comps that are out there. So, and I kind of always think that the appraisal, both for construction lending and perm financing, is a little bit the tail that wags the dog. So, maybe that's the first or a mark for some softening in that market that will, allow more of the permanent financing markets to open up.
Right. And it being on the forefront of all the valuations, the appraisals out there, we are daily gathering data. More and more projects are being appraised by our firm. We are aggregating that, and we help use that to push your deal through and get it financed. So
what would be the exit cap on a traditional, if that deal was traditional? The one that you just mentioned, the 5.
All right, so the question was, what would be the exit cap if the deal I just mentioned was traditional? I don't know, conservatively 4.5, maybe a little bit less. Just kind of, I would think it would vacillate between 4.25 and 4.5. What do you think, Bryce? Am I crazy?
I think it was in line with the market, man. I think it was 5. I think market rate.
I guess I'm crazy.
In Oakland, the deal I did was valued 25 basis point premium to cap rate. So it was a 5 cap versus a 4.75 in Oakland. That was existing as adaptive reuse, 1960s product. But 25 to 50 basis points premium is where we're seeing the market gel around valuation, co-living versus market rate.
Yes?
I guess I have 2 questions. One for Zachary. Do you mind sharing a little bit about the 142-unit co-living deal in Hollywood? Like, what kind of metrics did you hit? That DCR, the writing rate, LTC. And then my second question is for Adam. Do you mind sharing the Freddie Mac guidelines for co-living?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So the deal that we're doing in Hollywood, and the sponsors are here, so I'm going to share some, but I don't want to share everything. It's a 42-unit, 141-bed deal. It's in a really good location. The metrics for how the debt ended up shaking out is we're about 65% loan to cost. Pricing is LIBOR-based. It's sub 300. So we think that's very, very strong pricing. They're a very, very strong sponsor, so they should get that. I have to check what the DCR metrics were to get there. They were definitely stronger than traditional multifamily on what you'd see. I don't know if they were writing, I think it could have been a 1.4 or a 1.5. Thank you, all right, 1.3 to get there. So it was a little bit higher, but it wasn't too much higher. And then, you know, from an interest reserve sizing standpoint, they did it the standard way they do, kind of typical multifamily deal. What was interesting is we had another offer that was actually a little bit higher on proceeds. That was about $1 million-ish higher and priced almost as competitively. It had a 3 handle on the rate, so that was there too. Ultimately, this bank that we chose with was a relationship lender for the sponsor, had performed for them before. So because, you know, there wasn't too much of a difference, we opted to go that way. But I can tell you it was good to know that there was a second and even more competitive offer at the table. And we were able to leverage that offer to get other structure terms from the bank we ultimately went with, more in line with what the sponsors wanted, which I think we wouldn't have had the same negotiating power if we didn't have that.
Did they use the actual rate or underwriting rate?
You mean the start rate? No, they stressed. I mean, construction lenders, construction lenders would stress. I think the underwritten rate was either 5.5 or 6, so it was definitely a little bit stressed. But there was room there, and it was intentionally padded because, yeah, all these deals carry some appraisal risk, so we wanted to be pretty vigilant about that.
Yeah, so to answer your question about how the agencies want to write, specifically Fannie Mae, who's a little more aggressive than Freddie at this time. Fannie Mae's got a little more, it's a head start on the buy-off on this product than Freddie Mac. But speaking of Fannie Mae, it's 75 LTV, 1.25 debt cover in top markets. You know, where they're going to rely heavily and lean heavily on trailing rent collections and trailing expenses, okay? So if you're trying to push leverage, it would behoove you, and we would advise that we try to find 3, 6, 9 months of trailing operating history before we go into the perm and pursue that. In order to really, if you want to push proceeds and use those existing rents you've achieved, without, you know, barring that, they might bring back down rents a little bit. Okay, but what we want to see ideally for an ideal outcome is utilize trailing operating income expense and 125 cover, 75 LTV.
Thank you. I think we have time. We don't actually, but I'm going to, one last question, please.
From a lending underwriting perspective or appraisal underwriting perspective, is there any kind of coalescing of thought about what the turnover and vacancy type rates are being underwritten at?
You know, in nearly every market I've done deals in, I do deals around the country, we've been sub-5 market vacancy for a while. You know, how far below 5 depends on where you are. So in general, from the agency side and probably banks, because they take the agency's leads, typically 5% underwriting, you know, vacancy and economic loss, you know, 5%. You know, that's just a habit that we all have. Go ahead.
Is there any consideration, though, for potential higher turnover or deemed higher turnover in co-living relative to, you know, traditional multifamily?
I'll address that. So our experience at Common across our entire portfolio, turnover is roughly equivalent to what we see in traditional multifamily. The thing that I think is exciting is that our vacancy tends to be, you know, 2%. And that's because, notwithstanding the sort of normalized turnover, the demand is so strong. You know, we get 16,000 applications a month. And, you know, we have, you know, a 2% vacancy at the moment on sort of 1,000 units. So even though the turnover may be equivalent to multifamily, the demand is so high that we're able to backfill very quickly. So I don't know if the agencies anyone would accept that, but that in fact is our experience to date.
Yeah, and I echo that. In the construction lending markets, you know, we didn't see anybody underwriting higher vacancy than that. It was sort of 5% across the board. So I think that's a safe number. And frankly, it may even be conservative. It could be less.
Right. Thank you all. I'm going to thank you all for attending. Thank you all for participating. I'm going to turn the mic over to Jason, who I assume has some closing comments.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Honestly, this has been such a pleasure for us to host you. Hopefully, you've been able to take a lot of the information that you've heard on the panels and from Brad and from Scott today back home with you to continue to kind of spread the gospel of co-living. And with that, thank you very much, and good night.